Okay, so this is a cross-Atlantic joint sustainability symposium today, October 23rd, 2024. So I'm going to present the theme of this symposium on food systems, material ecology, and the circular economy. Dr. Joseph Dorsey at Patel College Global Sustainability. Claire Penny will be talking when it's time for the East London group just to present. So this presentation is going to be basically mine for the moment. Okay, so food is a basic need. We all are aware of that. And when we think about food, there are basic things we would like to see our food be. We want it to be safe so that, it's not harmful if we eat it. Tasty, food is not really worth eating unless it tastes good, right? But also nutritious, because, that nourishes our bodies. We need the vitamins and the minerals and so forth, and the energy for our bodies to function normally and to stay well. We also want it to be abundant, where it's, everywhere you go, you can find food to eat. We understand that scarcity is not something that we expect to have with food. We want it to be there when we want it. And also diverse. Varieties of food is important for us to, want it not be just the same thing over and over again. We crave all kinds of diversity in food. The convenience of having access to food at a low cost. It's important, because economies, can be kind of high price, and most of the time we'd like our food to be cheaper, and having access to things that we find nutritious and that we love to eat. And we create food from what we call agriculture. And agriculture is science and art and the practice of cultivating the soil to produce crops and to raise livestock in varying degrees, and the preparation and the marketing of these resulting products. And so to a certain degree, we've created food as a commodity, something to be bought and sold. Because our population numbers are such that we can't necessarily produce food for ourselves in the volumes that we need. So we now have industries that produce the food for us. And so as a commodity, there are various ways that we have turned it into a system where the acquisition and use of basic resources such as soil and water, land and so forth, having these are an important component of producing. We produce various products, and now we also process them so that they can be easier to eat, preserving them, and the ability to do that also involves packaging so that we can move food across towns, across nations, across the world. And that comes with use of papers and plastics and all kinds of other different, materials in order to keep food safe and, accessible. And that involves the aspect of distribution. From place to place, through transportation and various economic systems to distribute food across, markets and so forth. But ultimately, it's for consumption. It's for us to eat. And then, of course, what do you do with that? Now, we dispose of, I don't have to get into details, but once we consume, there's ways that, humans dispose of food, but also about the packaging. And we don't always complete what we eat. There's a lot of food waste out there, too. And so all of these aspects of a part of what we call a food system is important for us to understand that it's a large system, but it's also systems that can be done at the small scale. As a commodity, food is something that's, advertised. And as you can see in this picture of an aisle in a supermarket, there is a tremendous amount of packaging and marketing that takes place to attract us to certain food. You can read about what the ingredients are, who's producing them. There's a lot of information. So I always encourage people to read the labels and to find out where the food comes from, what's in it. And these things can, be important to our health. But like I said, as a commodity, it's also something to be bought and sold. So pricing is a big component of food and sales, and of course, purchasing and use. So these are what makes it a system. It's on one level, it's a sort of an ecological system for our bodies, but it's also part of an economic system as well as commodities. Now, we know that we started off, I guess you could say, tens of thousands, 10,000 years ago. So after the last interglacial period, humans went from being nomadic, wandering the earth, following migrations of animals or changes in seasons, and with the earth cooling, or warming actually, we were able to start to cultivate the land. And so over a 10,000 year period, we started to cultivate the land as well as domesticate animals, which created this agrarian times that we've lived in, which is still here to a certain degree. We eventually had, in the last couple of hundred years, the Industrial Revolution, where we've gone from just, taking the topsoil and using that to grow food to now digging deeper into the earth, into the crust to get to the minerals and to the ores and things to create our buildings and our machines and also extracting fossil fuels to power these machines and releasing more carbon into the atmosphere. Now, over the last several decades, we've moved more into an information age. So the population grew with this. Human population grew from the age of the agrarian, where food was more plentiful, to the age of the industrial, where we had urbanized, creating cities and so forth. And, having more access to food helped us to stay healthier and to produce larger populations. So when we look at our food systems now, they become global. These agro systems that are across the world, which has basically been taking place since the Industrial Revolution. So our food production is now industrialized and monitored by all kinds of information, logistics, and things like that. And so it's now being driven more by profit, and markets and so forth, and less people are living by subsistence. So these large-scale machinery, fertilizers, and pesticides and genetic modifications have become part of this industrialization of the food system. It's very business-orientated. Everywhere we look, you can find supermarket networks, high volumes of food production, and as well as government involvement through policies and politics, subsidies, and other forms of economic development. But there's also this other aspect of food. How secure is our food supply? And I had an earlier discussion before we started the symposium with the students about, the future based upon climate change. We can't question whether it's happening. It's just how do we now adapt to it? How do we mitigate these issues? How do we secure our food supply? As we know, we just had two destructive storms, hurricanes who've come through this Florida, Gulf Coast region. It's causing much devastation. These storms are getting stronger, they're getting more frequent, and a lot of that has to do with changes in the climate and, the warming of the oceans and so forth. And so if you think about food, those 10,000 years of agrarian eras had a fairly stable climate. When you're looking at growing crops, what do you need? You just basically need good soil. You need, consistent rain and sunlight. And so with that being stable, yes, you can grow crops all year round. But if you have a climate that's not very stable, when you don't know when the rain is coming or when rain comes too much, you get flooding. Or you don't have enough rain, you have drought. You have pests, that migrate from the southern hemisphere into the northern hemisphere. You have, flowers that bloom too soon or not enough, or late, so that the pollinators don't get an opportunity to pollinate. So if we have these, changes that cause instability, the food supply is going to be affected. And so that's why we need to start understanding that there may be needs for alternatives. And this is one of the reasons we're talking today is what are the alternative ways that we can deal with food supply? This large-scale agriculture is also part of it too. Can reduce biodiversity through monocropping, and that displaces natural ecosystems. The ecosystems are interconnected. Soil is live. Soil is not just dirt, but soil has worms and microbes and all kinds of activity that takes place that creates a natural and living system that nurtures the roots that creates the food production. If we have erosion of this topsoil, it not only creates dirt that doesn't have nutrients in it, but also can go into the oceans, rivers and streams, and eventually into the ocean, causing dead zones. So there's a lot of things that we have to understand that although having, this agricultural system, produces food for billions of people, it also has deleterious effects on the environment through pollution of freshwater environments, the runoff of fertilizers and pesticides and so forth can upset nutrient balances and so forth. So it's really important that we understand that alternatives are really important to have. And who are the stakeholders? There are kind of two categories of stakeholders. Those who are controlled by the global industrial food system. And it is us to a large degree. I'm sure many of us cannot survive without going to the supermarket, to grocery store, and so forth. We have a system that's set up that every one of us is dependent upon sort of this global system of food coming from all over the world. But as we've seen with COVID-19 and maybe other natural disasters, there's going to be disruptions in the food chain. So thinking more about alternative food systems or more localized systems is probably a good thing to start considering. So there's some other alternative food networks, such as organic farming, which really is kind of traditional farming, the way things used to be, and without pesticides and fertilizer, natural fertilizer. Food co-ops where people, work together to have products that they can mutually invest in and come and get once they put in a certain amount of money and time. We have our farmers markets where, the farmers get an opportunity to bring their food products to marketplaces where we can get more, fresh, natural, and localized food. And also civic agriculture, the notion of now growing food within the cities. And I'm very much into, that's my emphasis here at the Patel College, is the notion of urban agriculture. We do have land grant universities that focus on, rural agriculture. And so in order to kind of set us, aside from that, I felt that maybe looking at the cities as places for producing food will be important. Vertical farming, hydroponics, and aquaponics, controlled environments where we can grow food in buildings, within warehouses and shipping containers, where we can protect them from the elements and from pests and from vandalism and so forth, using the technologies that we have with, LED lighting and solar power and, turning food waste into gas and compost and things like that, are ways that we can take control of the systems that we have in this time of climate change, where growing naturally as we're used to through the agrarian age is getting a little more difficult and iffy. And also linkages with food to school. We have farm to fork and all these type of ideas of getting it directly to the people. I think, as an educator, I really feel that educating the next generation is important. So making sure that kids are, aware of the food systems and get a chance to participate, I think, is another important way of doing things. So now let's get to the presentations that the students will be doing today will have a connection to the idea of edible landscapes. And so an edible landscape is basically a place that's not a monoculture, where it's just one type of food, but it's more integrated into the natural systems, so like a forest, which grows naturally. So it's an ecosystem, but it's one that you can eat, that the food is edible. And so I envision, hopefully in the future, places where we can go that maybe have walls, of course, to protect it from, vandalism, but forests where you can pay a fee, somewhat like a co-op, and go into this food forest with a bag, and for some fee, you can pick from the trees, pick from the bushes, the flowers, the fruit, and various vegetables and things like that that are naturally grown, free of pesticides. And so I think that this would be a much more calming and leisure way of shopping, rather than being, in a supermarket, with packaged goods and things that are, almost, you could say they're sort of dead products to a certain degree. If you're eating from a food forest, everything that you're eating is live. So you're getting those nutrients, that vitality straight from the plants. So the food forest is something that you're going to hear about. My student, Bruna, is going to talk about her experience with a couple other students. Last spring, we had a class where one of the team projects was a food forest at this eco-education center called Rosebud. And there's also a school called Learning Gate that is sort of a STEM school that focuses on environment, and having them learn about food forests and see the gardens and so forth. I think is just a way for us to start to begin to look at the natural systems as a way to continue to feed us, in addition to, the traditional, the traditional way of going to supermarkets and stores. But this is a supplement. I don't think this will replace our, industrialized system. But I just think we have to have alternatives and ways. And so I'm not the expert on food forests. I'll give that to the students in for later presentations. But I just wanted to start us thinking about that as one of the aspects of creating a more equitable food system, because the distribution is an important component of societies. Is that the distribution, is it equitable? Is it fair? Does everyone have opportunity and access to the nutritious food that they need? And so I think it's a social issue too. And it's an issue of justice, making sure that people are nurtured, that there's no hunger, there's no starvation, that everyone has access to safe, healthy, and nutritious foods in all communities. And us here, as food systems professionals, have a tremendous role to play with that. As a food system professional, we have to educate people to eat better. Actually, my undergraduate degree is in human nutrition and food. So I have a strong I guess I can give a little brief explanation about my really passion and interest in food. Is that once I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I went to Ivory Coast in West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I worked with malnourished children and their families for 2 years. And then I worked in the Caribbean for the WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children program, providing supplemental food items and nutrition counseling to pregnant women, lactating women, children and infants, and so forth. And so I have had, a lot of experience working in food service and clinical nutrition as one of my first careers before I went into academia. So I continue to feel like I've gone full circle. So I continue to talk about how important nutrition is in food systems. So we want people to start to speak this common language of sustainability, but food, is part of that. And hopefully you guys can go out, not only, looking at your own individual health, but making sure we advocate for better and more equitable food systems as well. So as I close this section, I would just want to say that, a sustainable food system consists of certain aspects, that it's ecologically responsible, that we continue to look at how we affect the natural world when we make our decisions about food production, as well as fair and accessible for people, to make sure that people get the food that they need, that's safe and nutritious and healthy and abundant, because it should be a right that people have that access. But also looking at the local aspect, we spend a lot of time sending food around the world to, various food chain systems, which, can be okay. But a lot of times things are out of season, things are, injected with different things that preserve them, or, ingredients and things are put in there to preserve, which can have some effect on our health, And so, we don't know necessarily sometimes where cancers come from, but, there may be some of the things that we're eating, we have to watch what we eat, aspects of salt content, sugar content, fat content. But if you're eating locally, you have much more control and accountability and knowledge of what you're actually eating. So a food system should make sure that we're healthy, free of the toxins and things that can make us unhealthy, and also try to find out how we can cut down on waste. Food waste is also something that we'll be talking about later in this symposium. That food is really there's no food waste if you really think about it, because food being organic is something that can be turned into an energy source through biodigestion. We can see it become gas, or the liquid slurry that comes out could be used as a fertilizer, or it can be composted to turn back into soil. So if you really think about it, there is no waste in food if we redirect it towards becoming a resource rather than a waste product. Now, the second aspect of this symposium is the notion of material ecology, which would be an interdisciplinary system that examines the relationship between materials and their properties and ecological systems. And I'm just showing in this picture just everyday items, just different things, because I think one of the things that we emphasize a lot in environmental science and things like that is the natural world, the natural systems, the ecosystem, the plants and animals, and so forth. And then we talk a little bit about maybe the human system of the economy, because, the economy is actually a human ecology. It's how we commoditize and turn products, create products and goods and services for economics, monetary systems, and so forth. But a lot of times we don't think that within that system is a material ecology of things, of stuff that we make and create every day. And if you look around you, everything that you see, the paper, the plastic, the metals, the chairs, the desks, the carpet, the lights, all of this stuff has some materials. Some scientists, engineers, manufacturers have created, and designers have created things for us to use on a daily basis. So the material ecology is all around us. And I'm hoping that this symposium starts to have us think about that. That, what are we making? What are we wearing? And how is it affecting our health? What are these substances doing to our health, and as well as how can we manipulate or use them or manufacture them in ways that are more ecologically friendly, more or ergonomic, more sustainable, those type of things. So I think that material ecology is something we should think about, but it's also something we're going to talk about a little more. So aspects of material ecology involve, selection of resources, prioritizing materials that can be biodegradable or renewable. And it's part of a sort of a life cycle assessment. Everything has a life cycle. There's a point when it's sort of a raw material. There's a time that it becomes sort of a product, and then it's something that you maybe sits around for a while, but eventually it's bought and then it's sold, and then it becomes something that's useful and there's a utility value. And eventually it's no longer useful. It gets discarded. Now, once it's discarded, where does it go? And so that could be recycled or reused, or it could be just come trash. So through all materials, there is some cycle that we can look at and can evaluate and determine what's the best way to use it and to reuse it if possible. It also helps us to understand our ecological relationship with things around us, how these materials are affected by ecosystems, because most of the times they are extracted in some way from something, whether it's extracted from the ground, whether it's a living thing like a tree that's cut down and turned into wood or lumber. Would things be better if they were left undone? I sometimes lecture about the trees and the forests, the value of them as the things that they produce for us, such as oxygen and absorption of carbon, and the habitat for animals, and the root structure that holds the soil in place, or the shade that it creates to cool the environments, or the aesthetic, feelings that you see when you see something green and living. I mean, how do you put a monetary price on that? Sure, you can cut it down and turn it into a chair or a lumber or something like that, but that's what we call the negative externalities that are not calculated monetarily when we take natural systems and turn them into, commodities, and so forth. So we have to think about it as a harmonious coexistence, because the key to sustainability, of course, is longevity. And so if we want to continue as humans, and I usually tell my students that sustainability is about people. It's not really about the environment, because the environment would be fine without us. If humans disappeared from the planet today, the natural world would go on without us. So if we want to sustain ourselves, we have to sustain the environment. Now, material ecology has also been used in a much more complex way by scientists such as Neil Oxman at MIT to figure out how can we, and this is from a magazine that I first found out about her, is that material ecology is the interrelationship between artificial things fabricating with property gradients at a resolution of nature, enabling multifunctionality and matches nature and their environment. So part of it is trying to recreate nature and way doing things. Another way you can maybe look at it is, biomimicry to a certain degree. Part conceptual provocations, part real-world technologies, practical prototyping for a future of bio-informed design, nature not mimicked, but harnessed, hacked, and augmented. And the diagram kind of shows some of the components of adding additive manufacturing, adding things that make manufacturing enhanced, connecting biology, synthetics with biology, kind of interesting merging there, and material engineering, as well as using computation to design. There's a whole field of things related to material ecology that I could show, but I don't think within this presentation at the time. But this is just one example of Nuri Oxman's work using certain materials, such as shrimp shells, and also using 3D printing. All of this is done with 3D printing of materials. These are things that don't exist in nature, but using computers, analysis, and synthetics and organic materials, creating these visually beautiful but also functional new things. Now that sort of sculpture that's up in the top corner there, as you can see, resembles, say, the wings of cicadas or something like that. And imagine if it's something like that could basically be purifying the air, or absorbing humidity naturally. These are some of the ways we need to rethink about what we do with materials, so we can work with nature rather than either eliminate it or substitute it. We can enhance it. And so here are some natural things that we'll hear a little more about, how we can take the natural products or natural resources and turn them into products that are still organic and still functional, but work with nature rather than against nature. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is connecting all of this to the notion of the circular economy. And so we have a course that we teach here. In addition to my course, Concepts and Principles of Sustainability, is one of our core courses. We also have a systems thinking course. And everything we do here, we think about how things are interconnected. The nexus. We look at the nexus of water, energy, and food. Everything is interconnected. And I think that that's kind of the key to our survival as a species, is thinking about these interconnections. And so if you look at this diagram here, there are three types of economies. And the one that we're pretty much used to during the industrial age is the linear economy. And so the industrial age went from thinking about things as circular, but more towards linear, starting with what we call maybe the cradle to grave idea, that you start with the resource, you turn it into a product, you consume that product, and then you throw it away. It becomes waste. It goes into a landfill or maybe an incinerator, or it just becomes litter, debris that you see floating in the air, like plastic bags. I saw a plastic bag today floating through the air. Or, you look around and you see bottles and cans and trash and things that are just spewing around as litter. And these things are not being able to be absorbed by nature. They're not natural. They're synthetics. So we throw things away, but they don't go away. They still exist in some form of waste. So the next level could be what we call the chain economy, where you have not just a linear path, but you have somewhat of a circular path. You maybe could, you consume things, you can maybe downcycle it from the production, but waste will still take place. The system that we talk about in the circular economy is to not have any waste at all, to go from that everything becomes a resource. Everything is somehow brought in. And I think the word any word that has in it is sort of like the mantra of the 21st century, to redo, reuse, rethink, reestablish, reconsider, redo, recirculate. And so this is the idea of redoing things and making sure that we keep products in the loop, and then closing that loop will be key to that. Like I said before, the circular economy involves a lot of things, like reducing and rethinking, refusing, recovery, recycling, repurposing, remanufacturing, refurbishing, repairing, reusing. So any word you can think of that has in it is part of that circular economy, to keep things going. Because I always talk about how we're collapsing time as a species. As I mentioned before, we had hundreds of thousands of years of being nomadic. We had 10,000 years of being agrarian. We've had centuries about being industrial. We've had decades about being informational. And then what about the next centuries or thousands of years? If we're not thinking about how we're going to prolong ourselves into the next centuries or so, then we go into extinction. And I know we don't want to do that. So we're going to have to start figuring out ways to recreate our economies so that we can continue to thrive as a species on this planet, as well as live in harmony with the natural systems that are already here. So the benefits of a circular economy are that we have to have better use of our finite resources. We have to find ways of reducing the emissions from the fossil fuels, which will run out eventually. So we're going to have to start looking at alternatives as we move into the next decades and centuries. And continue to protect our health and the biodiversity of our ecosystems, because that's what gives us the air, the clean air and the water and all of the natural, soils and plants and animals that we live off of. And it can live in harmony with our economies too. We just have to redevelop the way we think about an economy. Think about economies that are green, that are steady state economies that benefit us and extend our resources over time. And all this involves jobs. We're talking to students. We have students talking today. I mean, you're not going to be a student forever. There is going to come a point where you have to get into the working world. And we want you come into the working world to either take over responsibilities of continuing these circular economies and these sustainability practices, but also creating new industries and new designs and new things that can continue us to move forward as a people. I know we can do it. We just have to continue to think about ourselves as stewards, that it is our responsibility and it's our accountability to ourselves and to our, friends, neighbors, and families, that we will move forward with a much better way of looking at the world and a better way of treating the world, sustainable future. And with that, I will now turn the presentation over to my student, Bruna. Okay, Bruna, are you ready?
Yes. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, hello everybody, my name is Bruna. I'm going to be presenting on the Food Forest project that I had the opportunity to do on the last semester with 3 other colleagues from the Patel College of Global Sustainability. We are all Master of Science students on different concentrations, but as our core course, we had the opportunity to work together in this project. And I'm going to be showing a little bit more of the results with you guys. Okay. All right. So our project focused on understanding the food forest systems on 2 different locations, one of them being Rosebud Continuum and the other Learning Gate, which is a community school. Both locations are close by here in the Tampa Bay area in Florida. And the objective was to understand both models, how the food forests work on those 2 different locations, and give suggestions on how which of them could improve based on what the other one are doing. So that's what I'm going to be showing a bit further. Based on the project literature review, we could understand a bit more of the concepts of food forest and how it affects all the main pillars of sustainability. So as for the environmental concept, most of food forests are based on water and soil conservation. So it has a very good environmental outcome. It also preserves a high biodiversity, not only for plants, but also for animals, as of one of the principles of food forests is to avoid pesticides and chemicals in any form. So it also preserves biodiversity. Entering in the social pillar of sustainability, it also contributes a lot, since most food forests are involved with educational programs, and it can be an employment source depending on the model that the food forest is established. As for the economic pillar, is the most challenging one, since not usually food forests are designed to be a business, and it's mostly to be a cooperative. So that can be a challenging one, but that doesn't mean that it's not possible to become economic, can become pro-economic as well. Also, another benefits of food forests that we observe is that it helps addresses problems like food security. So communities that are not necessarily close to food sources like supermarkets or cannot afford to buy everything on grocery stores. It can also address obesity, since it provides natural products for affordable price. And it also helps populations that are not financially well, that can also have a secure access to food. And also we identified on the projects that we searched on that public-private partnerships are a good way into keep increasing the food forests projects, and also so it can be more easily spread out, and it can stick. It's not a project that is going to last just for a couple of years. It can have a more sustainable and a longer life. So a little bit of the overview on the project. I will describe better both locations in the next slide. But the overview is to understand how the food forest or edible garden or sustainable farm concept was applied within the both areas, how also they are looking into spreading out sustainability and to actually educating populations on how it is on the important concept of sustainability and preserving our environment, and how they are more than just they are also open to the community. They are not only keeping these knowledges close to their inner circle. So a little bit of background on both. We have Rosebud, which is a community initiative. It's a place that we can understand how life can work off grid. So not only energy and water grid, but also on the food wise, which is what we are going to focus here. And talking about their edible garden, they have 14 tree species and 10 edible plants. They also have aquaponic and hydroponic systems, which is the ones that you can see in the picture above. And they prioritize the education, so student groups can go there, volunteer people can go to understand. Anyone can actually visit as long as they schedule. So it's open to the public in general. And their goal is to promote the education of sustainability wise. And on the other hand, we have Learning Aid, which is a community school. They are a charter school. So for those who might not be familiar with the term, charter schools are free for the students, but they are usually not funded by the government or by a private institution. They rely mostly on donations and on actions like fundraising actions. That's the word that I was missing. To survive, to maintain themselves. And usually there is a focus. So each charter school focus on something. And in the case of Learning Aid, it's a sustainability focused curriculum. So in addition to their regular curriculum, they also want their students to have a more sustainable way of life, at least during the school time. So they promote initiatives, and they promote the contact of the students with forests, with gardening, with this more natural way of living. And within their campus, they have a food forest integrated. They have a very big area of nature preserve. They actually have a preserved park inside their campus, which is pretty interesting. And it's also interesting to see how they kept their student engagement. So each of the grades, they go all the way from elementary up until high school. All the grades have a determined day of the week that they are responsible to take care of their food forests. And they have also a designated part of the garden that they are responsible for. Of course, based on their age, what they can do or not do, or what is possible for a kid to do. but it's interesting that they are actually the owners of that part of the garden. So they can learn a lot about it, and they can also experiment. They have this freedom to try new things within the garden. Okay, so here we did a little research on how we can use sustainability tools to improve food forests in both cases, and how we can benefit both of the locations. So talking about a bit of the life cycle analysis, when we talk about life cycle analysis in terms of food forests, we tend to see actually how which species are going to do better in that determined area, and also, which is an important factor, which species, how long does it take for the species to actually give fruit. Because thinking about a food forest, it's interesting that we have at least like an annual cycle. So that plant can provide food at least like once a year for a period of time. Otherwise would be, it might not make sense thinking of a food forest way, which the main objective is to provide food on a regular basis. So long cycles might not make sense. But also how on the life cycle analysis we can understand the before, and we can understand the afterlife as well. So how tree leaves can benefit the soil, and how one plant can help the other plant flourish more, either by providing shading or by helping balancing the soil as well. After that, we can also have the cost benefit analysis as a complement, because the life cycle analysis will not look to the financial part of the operations. So a cost benefit analysis can help understand in quantitatives how food forests can work, and that is an important matter. As I mentioned in the beginning, usually food forests are not thought as business, but the money is always a factor at the end of the day. So the cost benefit analysis is important in that matter, and it's a way to also assess the social benefits of food forests that are not sometimes analyzed in the life cycle analysis. We also have the risk management analysis, which is a way that we can avoid future risks that are very imminent. So how changes can be done in the project of the food forests in order to avoid a bigger problem in the future. So, for example, Florida has hurricanes and has rain, so maybe the way that you place one bigger tree around others, it also creates like a barrier to avoid that other species get carried away by water. So that's one example of how risk management analysis can work on a food forest way. But also those strategies have also weaknesses. That's why them combined, one kind of offsets the weaknesses of the other. And so as for the life cycle, it doesn't usually address the social and the economic benefits of the project. So in order of that, we use the cost benefit analysis. But the second one, so the cost benefit analysis, it can be hard to collect the data that we need, especially on the social part, on how it's hard to quantify before how much benefit will have to the community. It's hard to put in numbers, but we can have more of a qualitative analysis. But since cost benefits need numbers, it might be more challenging to have it. As for the risk management, it works better for a short-term analysis, When we talk about long-term, especially dealing with climate change, and in the case of food forests, also I've invasive species and pesticides, it's hard to project what can come. So the risk management, it works better for things that can be forecasted. For other things, other risks can try to be minimized, but some things are just hard to prevent, and um, not every possible risk can be addressed on long term, unfortunately. So here we have some recommendations after evaluating both sites. As for Learning Aid is a more dense food forest, so they are actually in the middle of a preserved area. So behind the food forest itself, it's all it's kind of a small forest. So it's a much more dense area, but we don't see a lot of it wasn't necessarily proper planned. Like I mentioned before, the students, they have the ability of trying new things and of planting new species that they want to try to make it work. But that is not necessarily planned. They have their designated space, and so they plant there. That can work, but that might not necessarily work. So it would be interesting if they could understand which plants and which varieties could work better on that specific location. Also, the plant variety. Both locations work mostly with, but especially rosebud, mostly with native species of Florida, which is a good aspect. And it's interesting, like we have in this image, how both places do it, but rosebud, they do it a little better because it's more planned on how the layers can help one of all other species to actually flourish better. And on top of that, it's important to mention that they also have pollinative species. So plants that are there with the only goal to attract bees and other pollinators. So the quality of their plants are also better. And also for pest control, it's interesting what it's already done, because they use also other species that might attract bugs, with the only purpose of avoiding those bugs to go to the edible plants. So they have non-edible species that will attract everything, so it prevents on going on the plants that will actually be eaten by people. As for challenges and limitations, that it gets a little bit more complicated. So labor, talking about Rosebud works mostly with volunteers. So it's not very constant. So maybe it relies a lot on the community being engaged into helping it. As for Learning Aid, they have the students going there at least once a week, and also parents can volunteer to taking care of the garden. However, they mentioned to us that during the summer, no one actually goes there. Actually, there's only one guy that works there, that he goes to just do the major gardening. He doesn't actually go to take care of each individual plant. So once the year begins again back in September, the kids have to start over. So they have to start over pretty much every year. It would be interesting for them to create an initiative to have this area conserved during the summer as well. As for the utilize the space, on the image you have rosebud. So it's more like we said that it was more like a farm, because the plants are not as dense as in Learning Aid. So maybe they could improve the density of the space by adding more plants. And also, like the main challenge in both cases is funding. Um, they mentioned that Rosebud have an idea of having like a farmers market in the future, which would help to raise more funds. That would be a great initiative. As for Learning Aid, they rely on fundraisings and donations, but those donations don't go only for the food forest, they go for the entire school operation. So that means that they are always so funding is always an alert. Money is always on a main topic of concern of them. So in case of they have a year with a drawback, maybe the food forest wouldn't be prioritized as much. So that's also an important aspect that it should be, we consider like a limitation of their location. As for the conclusion, since both locations are in the same area, are close by of each other, I think like a half an hour drive from each other, there's a lot of they can learn from them. As for Rosebud, on how to improve the density and how to have a more established community that comes and helps on a more frequent basis. And as for Learning Aid, it would be interesting from them learning from Rosebud all the plannings and everything that they do in order to keep the food forest with the best, in order to choose actually the best species to be planted on the food forests, so they could have the best outcome of their species. So with the proper shading, with the proper pollination, and also avoiding pests, which we know that is a risk in any situation. And Rosebud is doing that very well. They could they could also work as a benchmarking within each other. It would be an interesting approach. So if anyone has any questions, now is the time.
Well, let me just ask a question. So what did you get out of this exercise as a student thinking about your contribution to the food systems in the future? What do you think you learned about this, about some of the solutions that we could do?
Well, as of for me, food forest was a new concept. I have never seen it work on a urban environment. So I thought it was very interesting, and I think it should be more spread out, because as we learned during the research, there are several benefits, and also it's a way of people who grew up on urban spaces to actually have more contact with nature. And once we do that, we understand the importance of nature conservation. So even though those kids are growing up on a urban space like the Tampa Bay area, they also have this, they already know growing up the importance of keeping everything in place or conserving the environment. I also grew up on a very urbanized area, and I didn't have this direct contact with nature. So I think that in that case, sometimes it might be harder to actually understand the concept. Once you see it working, you tend to advocate more to conserve it and to preserve. So it would be interesting to if we could see initiatives like that more often on big cities and on spaces, on like urbanized spaces. Besides the benefits I mentioned before, which is providing food and also providing some jobs.
Thank you, Brenda. Any other questions from the audience before we take a short break?
Not from our end, Joseph. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we should take a small break. On the schedule, it's going to be supposed to be 15 minutes, but I don't think we need to take that long a time. So let's take, I guess, a 7-minute break or so, because then we could reconvene our time here at 10:15, and I guess for you guys 3:15. So we'll just take a few minutes break, and then we'll reconvene with the University of East London's presentation, starting with Claire Penny. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph.
Okay, it's 10:15 here. I think it's time for us to reconvene. And so now I'm going to turn the symposium over to my counterpart over in East London, Claire Penny. I'm going to read a little background about her before I let her do her presentation, and then her students' presentations. So Claire is a senior lecturer and course leader for landscape architecture in the School of Architecture, Computing, and Engineering at University of East London, where she is responsible for 3 postgraduate programs. Claire teaching focuses on developing students' confidence in professional skills and explorative research. Claire is also a chartered landscape architect with 15 years experience in professional practice, where she has worked for a wide variety of public and private sector practices. Her specialist areas include the design of parks and public spaces, design of play areas, construction management, and landscape planning. Claire's research includes memorial design, design and the management of sustainable drainage systems, and the psychology of landscape. Claire is currently researching the potential for nature-based solutions to benefit mental well-being of people isolated from society, with a particular focus on interplanetary space travel. Very interesting stuff. So without further ado, Claire Penny.
Yeah, so thank you, Joseph. So as Joseph was saying, a course leader for landscape architecture, and these are my students here in the room. And I met Joseph probably about a year ago in relation to the collaboration we have between USF and UEL, and we felt that this would be a really good way to integrate students, integrate our teaching, and hopefully you'll find the presentations today interesting. So just a little bit about landscape architecture here at UEL. So we have 3 postgraduate professional programs. They're all accredited by the Landscape Institute. That's the equivalent of, in the States, the American Society of Landscape Architecture. And we focus on preparing students for professional life. So these are all master's programs or postgraduate certificate programs, and they're designed to provide enough skills so that students can go out into the workplace and become landscape architects. Something we do a lot, and I mentioned to Joseph earlier about the rain, which you're all familiar with in the UK. There's only one of these visits out of these 3 where it wasn't raining and it was still very cloudy. But this is just an example of the types of site visits we do. It's a really integral part of students' training. So on the left was a site visit recently to Battersea Power Station in London, where students undertook sketching exercises to learn about the shape and structure of buildings and landscape and plant form. The one in the middle was more of a trip to see a completed landscape, so looking at details of materials and vegetation. And then on the right was a trip we did at the end of last year to the Knepp Estate, which is in West Sussex, which is a rewilding landscape that has turned from an agricultural landscape into a rewilded landscape. And we had a visit there from their staff. In terms of what we get up to in terms of design, this is some images of studios in our landscape studio where we get all the work done. We're always doing presentations, so our students here today, for some of them, they're new students this year, it'll be their first presentation. For some, it's a common occurrence. You know, we're always asking students to present to us and get across their ideas in lots of different ways. So that includes providing documents and drawings, and you can see some examples of those on the wall. So the Food Forest Project It began as a project in Florida, as colleagues there have said. So there was the student paper that was produced, and that was used as a basis for research. So all of our students here have been given that paper as a guide, and they then undertook research relating to a specific site. So the food forest project at this end is about designing a new food forest, and we provided a new site for them to design on, which I'll come on to. We then got students to do research on the design of food forests, so looking at what types of plants would grow, what types of layouts, the type of structure, which the last presentation talked a lot about, the 7 layers of the food forest, so that students had a really good understanding. This is the students leaving our campus to go on that site visit. So just a bit in terms of the location. So we selected a food forest site location with partners in industry. So for those of you who've never visited the UK or are not familiar with our geography, we're based in London, which is the capital city, which is in the very southeast of the UK. And within London, we're based in East London, as our name would suggest, very close to the River Thames. We're actually on the docks, which used to be a big industrial area and is now lots of innovative industries and education. And our site is immediately adjacent to our campus. And we found the site because we work with partners in industry, and this partner, HTA, who are landscape practice, are actually designing a new community on this site immediately adjacent to our campus. So we asked them if we could use it as an example of working on a real life project, and they gave us a site for the food forest. So this gives you kind of an aerial view. So the yellow star shows where our campus is. So as I mentioned, on the docks. The River Thames you can see on the very left-hand side of the image, and Beckton Gasworks is the site where a new residential community is being built, and where the food forest location is. Compared to the sites that you've been talking about at Rosebud and at the school, the food forest site here is very small, but it has been already allocated for what they were calling the orchard for the residential development. So it's a small site, it's around 60 metres long by 30 metres wide, and it will become a pocket park with food growing for the new community when they move in. And here's just an example. So this was the students working on their designs. This was the document we were given by the University of South Florida, which explained all about the food forest that were researched, and what kind of principles there might be. This was a visit to the site. Now, as you can imagine, as this is a forthcoming residential site, it's currently, it was former industry, it's currently derelict, and has kind of sprung up with its own vegetation. One of the kind of downsides of the site is that because of previous contamination, the entire site will have to be cleared and the soil remediated. In a way, that gave our students an opportunity to work with a completely blank canvas. But on the other hand, it would have been nice to be able to use some of the things already growing there. You can see at the front blackberry plants, which would have been great for an edible plant. Unfortunately, those will have gone by the time this is implemented. So student brief and considerations which were based on the research done by students at USF. Things like soil. So obviously, as I mentioned, this soil is going to be remediated. Students were able to consider what kind of soil they would want to bring in to make the best of a food forest situation. Climate was really key. Of course, the climate in Florida and the climate in London, very, very different. And so students had to adapt the recommendations from the report to our climate to make sure that we were selecting plants that would grow here. And then in terms of layout, they had to think about the best ways to arrange plants within the food forest and how might those be structured. So that involved doing research in our library and online, looking at things like the Community Food Forest Handbook as an example. Other things they had to think about, the structure, which was mentioned before, so the 7 layers, as it's typically known, of food forests, to make it this kind of self-sustaining landscape. Water, how was water going to be collected and moved around the site? And one key thing here is, of course, being a different climate. There's a lot of rain falling, but equally you need to capture that so you can water during dry seasons. So it was thinking about ways of moving that around the site. And then also species. So again, more research into native species. We don't have some of the exotic fruiting plants that you have in Florida. We do have a lot of berries. We do have things like apple and pear trees that are native to the UK or that have been adapted for use in the UK. So students were given a brief where native plants should be used, but also there may be a need to use non-natives in order to sustain the community need for food. So to sum up today's presentations that you're going to see, you're going to have students present to you their site analysis. So talking about the site that I've mentioned, understanding the site, where it's located, things like prevailing winds and flood maps so that they understand what the future of that site's going to look like. Local research, so that thinking about the wider areas, although the site is small, thinking about, for example, any native edible plants that already grow locally and how those might be used in the design. Concept development, so coming up with the ideas, sketching and collaging and things to think through the ideas, and then finally their food forest designs. So we've got two groups who are presenting today, and the group leaders are going to be the ones presenting, but they are larger teams, and you can kind of see in the background a lot of work has gone into this. I'm sure they're all going to take a deep breath after the presentations, but I hope you can sit back and enjoy the student presentations.
First of all, hello and good morning to the people in the USA and good afternoon to people here. The first group, it's me and Sonia with me presenting today for the first project. So starting with the site introduction, the site is basically Patel gas works, one of the largest coal gas works. It was back then in 1870, which was one of the largest gas works in Beckton, East London, which is located north bank of the River Thames. Which the site is now allocated to Newham in 2018 for the local planning policy for comprehensive residential and mixed-use buildings, as redevelopment provides the opportunity to provide high-end new home as well as a mix of commercial and community use. Now, talking about the history plays a major role in forming the site as it is today. The gas works inaugurated in 1870s. The Beckton provided gas to the London city. In 1878, a British passenger paddle steamer collided with another ship, causing disastrous accident just near to the site, which damaged the site in a major way. In 1969 brought the closure of many traditional gas works, including Beckton, as the country transited to North Sea gas. After the closure, the site was being used for filming locations. You can see this location being used in Stanley Kubrick's movie, as well as a few songs, music videos. Just because the location was a derelict site characterized by neglected buildings and ruins of former industry till 2018. The site is now relatively flat, and as Claire mentioned, that it is a contaminated soil, which will all be gone by the time it will be in construction. Coming to the demographics, we can see that Census 2021 data suggests that the population of the site is approximately 16,152, which is just 4.6% of the Newham population. Another notable numbers that are 53.5% population is non-white British, which is second largest in Newham area. Additionally, 20.2% of the population have no qualifications. The common age group of residing population is between 25 to 35 years, which is relatively very young. The policies that we considered for the design emphasize majorly on healthy environment, food safety, accessibility, as well as community. As we all know that after COVID, people have started avoiding social gatherings and going out in nature. The London policy suggests that we should consider these ideologies to help them commute and socialize and be physically active. As we can see, the demographics that suggest the majority of the population is between 25 to 35 years of age group. It is very important for them to be physically active. And not only that, the design should also consider the elderly, the kids, as well as the physically disabled people and their accessibility. Coming to the site analysis and survey, whilst vehicle access to the site is supported, no public access to the site currently exists. The site is not located within any protected view corridors. The chart above suggests that there is no risk of flooding by surface water, as well as given the proximity to the river, it considered likely that the surface water discharges to the river. Additionally, the topography of the site is relatively flat, as we mentioned earlier. The sunshade analysis helped us improve our design in so many ways, as it helps us understand which part of the site will be under shade or which part of the site will be properly in sun exposure, which helped us to choose the plants which we will be using for the food forest, as how much sun exposure each of the plant will be needing for their growth.
So moving into the main design, the design concepts we came up with as a group was the golden ratio. And this is because it evokes a sense of balance and beauty. So the major parts and then access to the sites was derived from the golden ratio. Aside as taking a look at the design considerations, we have functionality, accessibility, climate, and then sustainability. And then this is going to be a purely functional design. So we use the golden ratio for the parts, and then everything else was based on functionality. The allocation of space, as I said earlier, was based solely on functionality. And with water management, we'll be working with the wagon system, where we'll have rain from the sky. Then across the design, we have bioswales and SADs. That would be the second point of contact. Then it moves into a pond, which is a part of a design brief. So that would be the third point of contact. And then it goes into a storage tank. So in our design, we have rain catchers, which looks like the pictures in our precedent images. It's going to harvest rain and then it will be stored into a tank. In the worst case scenario, on the wagon system, if the pond overflows, it goes into the storage tank. And if the storage tank overflows, it goes off-site. We also have our central point at the center, which will have seating and then the rain catcher being the main feature of our design to attract people to the place. So this is our food forest master plan. Taking you through as a user, you come through. Can you see the movement of the mouse on the screen? So coming as a user, coming to the site, you come through here, and then you can see all the plants. We have zone A, zone B, zone C, zone D, and zone E. So for zone 1, that's where the morning sun hits from our sun analysis. It has the morning sun, and the zone 2 will have the afternoon sun. The zone 3 will have shade. Zone 4 has majority of the sun, but it's going to be a pleasant space. And we have zone 5 having the maximum sun. So using the sun analysis and everything, we positioned and then arranged the plants in a way that every zone will have a little bit of everything. So in zone 1, we're going to have a dense forest and then the beginning of a kids' woodland park. And in zone 2, we'll have majority of our shade trees, we'll have pollinators, orchids, and then a continuation of the kids' woodland park. So in zone 3, where the sites will be mostly shady, we have an educational facility, which is the blue circular structured right here. We have our composting around the side as well. And in zone 5, which has maximum sun, is mostly going to be herbs and in raised beds. And it has seating, and then the main feature of our whole design, which is the rain catcher. Zone 4 will be more of the pleasant space, kind of a chill area. There's a pond for biodiversity, so we can have fishes in the pond and edible herbs alongside. Again, with the rain catcher, we have rain catchers at vantage points across the sites for rain harvesting. And here we have a collage of how we feel the space is going to look like. We have the path across, and then we have the meeting points and some flowers, some orchids, pollinators, and then animal species will be introduced into the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the whole group like to come and stand at the front so people can see who's done the work? Maybe wave to our colleagues in Florida. I think the camera is over there. Thank you to those who are cheering.
Great job. Great job. Looks like Dr. Cohen wants to say something.
Yeah, hi. I loved your presentation. And I want to ask, because my wife has done her permaculture design certificate. She's sitting watching on her computer. She's a student at Patel College. And because I've worked with permaculture, the designs get informed by the general permaculture literature or movement. Is there any permaculture resonance? And the other thing is, have you started putting any of these beautiful plans that you've illustrated using the great sacred geometries into a GIS or other digital design program?
Yeah, could somebody in the group perhaps answer the question around permaculture and the research that you did around permaculture? Alice, do you want to?
So we mainly considered the 7-layer of a food forest. So yes. Hi. So our reference point was the 7-layer of a food forest, and also considering the native and non-native plant species that they can grow together. So in terms of designing the food forest, we also considered like the nitrogen fixers that can grow and pollinators, just increasing the quality of the ground as well, because we were aware that this is an old industrial site. So for us, it was important to first of all, consider the sun and the drainage conditions, and then our planting came around that idea, and also considering which parts will be denser and which parts will be for the community purpose. So it is a food forest, but it is also a community space. So we considered the idea of permaculture also being an educational activity in the community center where people learn how to grow their own food. So yeah, there were various ideas of permaculture, but mainly right plant in right place, using the local conditions and growing food that are suitable for the UK conditions. So this was the first thing. Claire was very clear about, like, we should think of the UK and our own context, but learning the principles from your research.
Thank you, Alice. And then
Okay.
The second part of the question, Dr. Culhane, what was the second part?
Second part was about using digital design tools, like we're using in my class QGIS because it's open source, but my wife is in another class in geosciences doing her landscapes with ArcGIS Pro, which is of course more expensive, but that's what the industry uses. And I wondered what tools you might be using or consider using besides the beautifully illustrated, what looked like mostly hand-drawn maps, whether you're doing any geotagging, whether you're using GPS data. I'm just curious about your data layers.
Okay, so we use CAD. So the map you see is to scale. We use CAD to get all the dimensions and then the actual areas of the space. And the positioning of the plants was carefully decided and agreed on, depending on the size, the shape, how high it's going to go and how wide it's going to be. So we took everything into consideration.
Yeah, so we use AutoCAD for a lot of these kind of drawings. We also use Adobe Creative Suite programs for the kind of rendering and so on. There isn't a lot of GIS use on our programs, I would say, because we're focusing more on design. But we do work with a specialist in mapping who comes in to teach students about layers in mapping and data collection, and all of our drawings begin with a map, and that's typically from a free GIS source or a government GIS source, something that's available for free. So yeah, that's how they're produced.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I know we're going to have another group of students present, and then we'll have more time for question and answer during the panel discussion. But I think, Basha, I think did you have a question? I think I saw your hand up for a second there, Basha.
Yes, I actually wanted to ask. Good afternoon, or good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I wanted to ask a question.
Right.
When University of South Florida finished their own presentation about the food forest. So to make first to say that the two presentations are fantastic. Good concept and well articulated. But to make it to make the food forest a bit or more sustainable or sustainable in itself, have you considered, or what plans do you have about securing the food forest against invasion, for example? I see that the University of East London has, allowance for the food forest to be, a place of relaxation and the rest of that. But remember that like a typical park or forest, the food or the fruits that you see in there are not as edible as these ones are going to be, right? And so do you have any plans or, because especially once this proof of concept goes full scale, of course, it will be replicated, for example, for real estate development and the rest of them. What are the ideas around, have you thought about securing the food forest in itself? Is it going to have perimeter fencing, and then, because, for example, against rodents, what have you, what ideas are around this in terms of, the structure of implementation of the food forest? That was my question. So to both universities.
Yeah, it's something that I've been concerned about just from conceptually. I haven't done as much research into that, but I think off the top of my head, I assume that a wall, like if you were to make it a little more commercialized, a larger scale thing, that some kind of wall that's there. And I know it sounds a little bit exclusive, but you're right. You need to secure this food supply. But I also think of it as maybe as a co-op type of operation where people pay their money up front to have access to this food forest at a certain time of year. There's maybe trails and there may be guides, and they can come with the bag, you get a bag or whatever, and you can gather, for the time that you're there and certain times a year. But you're right, it would have to have some security aspects to it, unfortunately, but I'm right, you're right. I think we'd have to think about those things, pests and rodents, vandalism, and those type of things, I'm sure, are necessary to consider. Bruna, you have any thoughts, Bruna, on this?
Yeah, so to complement what Dr. Dorsey said, in both cases that we physically went there to evaluate, it's private property. So in the case of the school, it's easier to see because all the school's security system ends up protecting as well the food forest. As for Rosebud, it is a private community, so it is managed by someone. It's not like anyone is allowed to enter without a certain previous authorization, even if it's like a day that is open to the public to enter. Someone is there to watch it and to make sure that no vandalisms and nothing like that can happen. Another project as well that we researched for our literature review, it's a similar situation. It's usually put in practice on private-public partnerships. So it's usually like a private space that it's conceived to this initiative, and someone manages to have a better control of who actually access the space And even though the initiatives always welcome everyone to be a part of the food forest, they have to get like a certain training in order to modify the space. It's not just go there and get it like we enter a grocery store, you know.
Just to come in there in terms of the UK, the kind of nearest equivalent that we've had for many years is the allotment, which is where the local government will rent you a parcel of land to grow food. And this has been something, it's very embedded in culture in the UK in terms of food growing. And there's been a big resurgence over the last kind of 20 years of people wanting allotments. So for many years, they just were not used and they were left empty. And now there are huge waiting lists to get an allotment. It's very low cost and it's designed simply as a resource for people. Allotments generally tend to be fenced. That's quite common. They sometimes have other facilities like toilets and rest areas and so on, which need protection from things like vandalism. However, in public parks in the UK, we do have edible foods, and it's becoming more common. So a food forest would be a kind of another step forward in that, I guess. But we do have things like fruit trees in public spaces, usually with some kind of information board to explain what is edible, what you can take. And this is, you know, kind of popping up in high streets as well. I know in Florida, Joseph, you mentioned somewhere that there's kind of an edible high street not far from you guys. I think, was it in Sarasota?
Yeah, Anna Marie Island.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and we do have that increasingly. And I worked for many years in local government where people were asking for edible things. The biggest challenge that we have, which may also fit with the USA, is that sometimes communities will come together and they really want to grow food. But those kind of cooperatives sometimes fall apart. You know, someone moves away. And then you're kind of left with a space that isn't managed. And that's actually the biggest threat to those kind of food cooperatives. In this case, I told the students to design it as a space that would be open to the public because of where it's located. So when this is constructed, it will be surrounded by residential buildings. And what we don't want is a public space that then has giant fences or walls around it. Obviously, you have to think further. These are concepts. So when you go into the detail of it, you're going to have to think around maybe some areas of it would need to be fenced to protect certain facilities. Some areas may be able to be open. But for the purposes of the students, it was me that told them to leave it open. Maybe optimistically.
Yes.
Those, that's a great question,
okay,
and I
Michael.
apologize if I'm going to be redundant here because I've had some connection issues. I had to come on with my laptop now. But you run into these problems with community gardens, especially in inner city areas where vandalism may become, and it's usually not vandalism, it's younger kids that are just coming in and, you know, playing around in the area. It's not so much theft related. What it does do though is it affects your overall yields, which becomes problematic, you know, especially if you're growing specific types of crops or fruits or things like that. One of the best things that they found working in LA and some of the other areas where this was problematic is they had people on site. So like what Dr. Culhane was talking about with Rosebud, there's always somebody there. I mean, and when you have a presence there, that brings less likelihood to have people interacting in kind of a less than beneficial way with your community garden or with your food forest. So with that said, you know, there's been limited success with some of the fences and things like that, because if somebody wants to get into your facility and it's not manned, then obviously they can get through your fence pretty easy by just climbing over it, especially if it's young kids or, you know, children and stuff like that. So that's something to keep in mind. If the facility is large enough and there's active engagement in it, people generally tend to stay away and respect the area. If you're also giving to the local community, then the local community will also tend to protect the facility itself.
Thank you, Michael. And Michael's on our faculty as well here at Patel College. All right, well, Claire, I guess you have another team that would like to talk about their research as well.
Yes, yeah, we'll do team 2 now. Thank you, team 1.
I should ask you to like stand over there. The light is really bad. Everyone there, you guys in there. I need to touch them first, right? So, okay, is that okay? Yeah. Just kind of decide, yeah. So wrong.
So hello everyone, we're Group 2 and we're going to talk through our project around introducing a food forest to Beckton Riverside. I'm Martha and we also have Haruka and Natalie. And Natalie also presenting, and we're going to start by talking through our site survey, our concept and master plan. So you're already familiar with the location of the site. It's in the Borough of Newham, which is where this university is situated, and it's currently a brownfield site, and a former gasworks was there, and developers are intending on creating a vibrant riverside neighbourhood on this site. And the food forest, you can see my mouse is this sort of darker red boundary here within the wider master plan, and if you can also still see my mouse, it's sort of nestled within these residential buildings here, so it's quite an enclosed site. The now closed Beckton Gasworks is really an important part of London's industrial past, and Beckton's community was formed around this gasworks industry. They created lots of schools and homes, so it's really the character of the area, and linking to Newham's local plan. It's really important to contribute to the local character, but it also talks about thinking about accessibility, food growth and water management, all of which align very much with food forest principles. We also visited the site and conducted a site analysis. We're very close to an airport, so there's a lot of noise coming from the airport. Also, there's a potential to have a school on the, so this is the site, the dotted red boundary, and there's a street just south, which will be the main route kind of going from the sort of accessing rail to the river, and there's an intention to have a riverside park and the plaza. That will be the central area. So really thinking about that people movement going below where the food forest will be located. And it's, as I said, it's very enclosed. So it'll be residential buildings sort of like north of where the food forest is. So that adds to us thinking about where the sunnier spots will be and positioning trees within that as well, and opening up the space to have more sun coming in, and also linking up the green spaces as well, and also the wind as well coming off the water. So this is looking at the green infrastructure. So this map shows different types of green space within the boundary and surrounding. So as I said before, the site is mainly brownfield and overgrown vegetation, with some tree coverage. So the trees that are currently there can cope really well with pollution and contaminated soil, like the white willow. And it also highlights the weak connections coming from the river and the mud flats, which have quite strong green infrastructure connections going down the river, but further inland, and how where this food forest is situated can be quite a key node in strengthening those connections for wildlife. And a few plant species that we have identified on site, again, are quite hardy and can cope with the contaminated soil. But we did find some edible species there, such as blackberries, so it's highlighting potential. And also we can play a role in enhancing the habitat for bird species that have been found around. There's a lake situated here, which has a lot of wetland birds, and also the sewage works as well, just north of the site.
So we also looked at the blue infrastructure on the site. So in terms of the water bodies, obviously you're sitting right on the River Thames. The River Thames forms part of the Blue River Network, and the other rivers that we have within this site are the River Lee and the Roding. We looked a little bit at the quality of the water within the site as well. So the River Lee doesn't have great water quality. It was in 1999, it was stated that the water quality was bad, and the water quality for the other two rivers is moderate. So there's a need to improve the linkage from the green networks to the blue networks as well. linked to the rivers, we also looked at flooding within the area as well, or the potential of flooding. So in terms of the site, it is actually a kind of category A flood site when you look at it just as a site. But when you look at it for planning purposes, you need to look at it as a category 3A. There's the risk of river flooding. The River Thames flows into the Thames. There's some tidal, fluvial flooding risk. There's also groundwater flooding risk within the area. And all of that is very heavily strategically managed by the City of London. So we've put an image there of the Thames Barrier, which manages the level of the water, and the groundwater is also managed there. And the funny little map that we have in the corner just kind of shows how far that goes in terms of a flood defence. London is obviously an area which is very heavily populated, and so we are, I guess, all used to now sort of there's a lot of building done on these sites which maybe traditionally earlier wouldn't have been built on, and so we look very much at mitigating the flood risk.
So next we're talking about the vision of our design. So we want our food forest to provide a sense of refuge from an otherwise built up new and busy residential area. It offers a space to escape into nature and learn about food growing, basket weaving and other elements that can be produced from the food forest, or even just relax with a book in the more secluded spots. And the mood board gives a flavour of the tones and the feel of the space that we are trying to create with our design. And our vision statement is the sight, smells, touch and taste will feed the mind, body and soul. We've based our design and planting around a set of principles of food forestry informed by the Patel College's report. In summary, consider what the site conditions are, layered and diverse planting, focus on native planting where possible, sustainable water management, wildlife-friendly planting and soil health. And our design language is very much inspired by sort of circular shapes, by the kind of gas holders and the fact that this was a gasworks site before, and also planting in very loose organic lines to mimic nature. So, for example, the Apricot Lane Farm in California, where you've got planting of the orchard on the contour lines. And our focal point of our site is a bigger gas holder structure with seating and teaching area, and then vines growing up, and then a smaller structure within that that has a platform so you can be in the tree canopy and kind of have a perspective over the food forest. We've also looked at soil and water strategy within our site. So the first thing, obviously, when we've mapped out our initial sketch, we've also looked at what we want to consider in terms of the incline of the site, both for thinking about the soil that is there, has been left on the site, and also a strategy for water within the site. So because the site was a gasworks, much of all of the existing plants and trees will have been removed. And obviously in terms of planning, we will need to put back what has been removed, and we're also looking to add more in terms of the planting that we will be putting onto the site. And the soil on the site needs to be remediated. And so was thinking of that, and also in terms of the water linked with that. So we've also included within the site 3 swales. So we're looking at keeping, so there's one swale large swell in the middle, and also a swell which will also be a kind of a wetland pond. And we've thought of the incline really in terms of keeping water when it rains within the site, and also keeping the soil within the site as well. So we don't want sort of sediment and soil sort of moving across the site, but we want, when it rains, that we will get sort of a slight incline into the site so that the water will fall within the site and water the plants within the site. And then in terms of flood management, we've considered that within the site as well. So what we've tried to do is keep the water within the site. So water would, as if there was too much water coming in, the water would stay within this swale here. There's space for it to move out into these slightly wider areas. There is an incline so that it would overflow potentially into this larger, deeper swale here. And then there's another swell, a sort of a wetland swell. And again, these also have space sort of curves down for it to move, to move outwards without moving out of the site. And we've also included some meandering channels. I'm a bit heavy-fingered on the pad, sorry about that. We've also included some meandering channels, which will allow the meandering swales, which will allow the water to go into channels sort of around the site. And then in terms of the soil within the site, we're also looking at obviously enhancing the soil with nitrogen coming from the plants, but also from the mulch. And we've got water collection points. So we've got water butts which will be sort of next to the collected off the roofs of our compostable toilet, where we will also have a bale for people to pee into the hay as well. And then also we've also got an area for collecting compost. And then with that water, we'll also look at creating liquid fertilizer to mulch the site. And then we have a structure which you'll be able to see when we look at that master plan, which we'll talk about. And that includes a kind of a drain along the top, and it will have little flows out to rain chains, and that will allow water to just come down and kind of water the site. But really it will be a kind of a fun thing as well to encourage people to come to the site when it's raining as well, maybe something fun for the children to get involved with as well. Moving on, master plan. As we mentioned earlier, at heart of the master plan is gaswork structure, which is the most interesting part we've designed. And in there, there are circular areas that can be used for as workshop spaces. These seating areas are surrounded by sensory meadows designed to help the well-being of people, with fragrant plants that creates a healing atmosphere. So it serves many purposes, like well-being spaces and educational resources. So close to these, we have vegetable raised beds serving as community garden. This space might be used for put into the practice what they've learned in workshop. And we have some hydroponic system. This one, hydroponic system in place to help manage contamination. And in terms of planting, our planting design flows in continuous waves, which with organic lines going through all of the area. So we primarily plant
European crab apple trees as an upper canopy grafted onto dwarfing rootstock, making them easier to harvest and maintain. So on the upper area, this is nursery zone. We will plant walnut and dwarf chestnut trees as lower canopy. Since it's near residential areas, so we will keep the area open by avoiding dense vegetation like hedges, making it easier to access for local residents. Yes, these also have long chairs and long tables and chairs, targeting more residents to gather. On the other side, we have park strip. We will plant Japanese persimmons that will provide shade and help with carbon storage without taking up too much space. So there's a secondary paths in these areas surrounded by these food forestry planting. So it feels like hidden secret paths for local residents. We will keep the fields open so people can see that exist and feel safe. The paths will be made of bark, wood chips, and we are also planning to add mushroom trail in these areas. And this is Blossom Hill, which is one of the key areas. This area features a gentle slope, making it easy walk to the top, where people can enjoy beautiful views. And yes, this area also attracts people from outside. So Blossom here we have blossoming trees for seasonal change. And lastly, this is toilet and tool shed with compost. So the roof of these areas will have mixed sedum planting, which creates habitats for birds, bees, butterflies, and other insects, helping to support biodiversity across the area. Yes, and in this way, we are creating a food forest that engages the sense of sight and sound, also being self-sustaining to feed the mind, body, and soul. That's our okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Nice.
Group 2, thank you. Okay, any questions for group 2?
Well, I can say that was a lot of work that these teams have put into this, and we really appreciate it. I learned quite a bit about food forest from your students. So I believe that we can open up now, because this is the time where we can do a panel discussion, but it may be more of a question and answer. I don't know. I have a few questions. I'm sure you do too, but it's supposed to be a discussion among the students, but since it's arranged the way it is virtually, I don't know how to do that. So what do you want to do, Claire? Do you want to just sort of have the students start talking or answer some questions?
Yeah, I think Dr. Culhane has a question.
Yeah, it was a reaction that my wife had because she comes from a farming village in Palestine with a lot of different rocky topography and a lot of political challenges. But it has to do with when the pushback you're getting restrictions. I mean, in her case, there's severe restrictions because of occupation and military presence and settler colonialism and all that keep the permaculture work we've done in the West Bank from being successful. because of this lack of ability to, structures get built, things get done, and then they get bulldozed or people are actually shot. So there's a lot of difficulties there. Here in Florida, we don't have that, but we seem to have a lot more trouble getting, and apart from places like Rosebud, which you've seen, it's harder to generalize this into a municipal plan often, because the zeitgeist here, if you like, is one, I think, more of short-term maximization of profits and looking at whether or not the business community and fully embraces these policies that we study in our sustainability program. So I'm wondering, do you feel encouraged when you come up with these designs and you plant them? Do you just get a sort of lip service in the conference? Yeah, that's really neat. Or do you get, yeah, let's put money into this. Let's make land available. Let's encourage this so it doesn't die on the vine or die on the page, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting. The different kind of approaches that I'm familiar with in the USA and the UK and how we approach things in terms of funding is quite different. But the challenges remain. So although government bodies are keen to invest in these types of products for their community, these kind of spaces, the budgets are very, very small. So although there is a will from officers in local government, for example. So I've worked in local government and we had lots of great ideas for doing these kind of things. We had edible landscapes we were doing, but the budgets are very, very small, which means the creativity has to be very, very high. So anything you're doing needs a good designer and needs good research behind it so that it's got a kind of sustainable method. So one of the things that often there is that, as I mentioned before, when you get community groups asking for land to create a community garden, local governments are quite keen to do that, but the risk is always that that co-op will fall apart. So often there's an approach taken where, okay, well, what we'll provide is something that will self-sustain even in the absence of people. So we did a lot of orchards, a lot of tree planting. Ultimately, if people don't eat the apples, birds will. And so there is this kind of different approach to things. But the challenge is still the same in the sense that whoever is funding it, it's not always easy to get that funding. And sometimes perhaps in the US, it's more that there's a kind of upsurge of funding initially and a lot of interest, perhaps public-private partnership, but then things fall away. And in the UK, it starts with very small amounts, but sometimes is built through the community engagement. If communities demonstrate that this is something they're passionate about, if you can spread the word through marketing and, all these kind of things, then potentially you can gain more. But I think the challenge is, at the end of the day, the same. It's just a different way of funding, perhaps, for these spaces.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because intimidation and discouragement seem to be what keeps students from actively getting engaged. And we're on private property owned by the wonderful Bishop family, who've been doing this for 8 years now at Rosebud. But when we try to go outside the borders of this, it's a lot harder. And you have to find often people or institutions that wholly embrace it. And then there's conflicts because there's no best practice that's well established. For example, we know from a friend doing similar work on his property in Bamboo Grove in Arcadia, they survived the hurricane because they built a whole surrounding of clumping giant bamboo. Here, the municipality and the county officials told us to remove the bamboo that we planted to try to create these, and they don't favor us creating berms and swales out of the deadfall that comes. We're supposed to remove it off property, and there's this whole thing about a landscape that is clean, a landscape that is, if you're going to be teaching about non-invasive species, or going to teach about non-natives, native species, to have a real strong justification for why you would plant something that is out of context for the Florida development landscape, if you like. And then there's the HOAs, which by the housing authorities that will tell you literally, like, you can't do that kind of, you don't want a food forest. There's going to be liability. It's always liability. Someone will slip and fall on the fruit. People will fight over the fruit. Insects and vermin will come in. So I'm wondering how you're navigating that, because you've had hundreds of years more than us to negotiate those. We're still a young colony, and we're dealing with it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of liability, that's always something. One thing that we try not to impress on our students too much while they're here is things like budgets and liability, but they're always in mind. So we don't necessarily give our students fixed budgets unless they're working with a particular community group who have a fixed budget, because we want them at this stage in their careers to think broadly and to have that kind of optimism and ambition in their designs, because when they go into practice, they're just going to be hit with budgets and liability and all these things that kind of sap your soul. And we want them to begin from a basis of optimism. And so it's quite tricky, but we do make them aware of, this is a kind of scheme that might be delivered on a small budget. This is the kind of scheme that you might be able to do with a larger budget. And yeah, it's not although, as I say, it's the kind of mechanisms and the players may be different, but the challenges are still the same. One thing that I think we all need to perhaps look into is things like corporate sustainability. So looking at all kinds of companies who have sustainability strategies, who have volunteering strategies, who can send armies of people to help with these kind of projects. So I used to work for AECOM, who you may be familiar with. It's a US company. And all of us had 2 days a year to volunteer, just provided by the company. But in addition, there's charity money going left, right, and centre. So it's about coordinating that and tapping into those kind of resources. All big companies have this, both in the USA and here. So, there are ways to make those public-private partnerships work, I think. It's difficult for government organisations who tend to be driving things here to get embroiled in a public-private partnership. There's lots of rules around it and so on. But communities certainly and charities can reach out for that kind of help. And we have seen that where charities kind of get help from corporate organisations certainly with initial building and construction, perhaps not so much the management. I have something. Yes, Sarah is at the back of the room. Do you want to come forward, Sarah? So Sarah is representing the Landscape Institute today, who are our accrediting body, and Sarah works for the Environment Agency, who are a government body in the UK.
I think, just to add to what Claire has said, I think the local authorities don't really have the confidence about what they're doing in this space, so they're really keen although they may not show it, for community groups to be doing this kind of thing, because they just don't have the tools or resources or the knowledge. And when you see the case studies or their examples that they will show are quite often things like community-driven food farms, pocket parks and things like that. So I think they love them but don't quite know how to do them, are really willing for these things to happen, because they do also attract funding. And one other thing I was going to add, there's a lot of this growing conversations, as I'm sure you're all aware of, around social value, and all the benefits that this kind of project brings. That's a massive enabler, that whole conversation about social value in projects, which is really changing the way we think about things, because I think, say, maintenance has been considered as a negative. You design something to be finished and then you can walk away from it and you never have to look at it again. Now bringing people together to maintain gardens like this, where you want a garden to be looking great in the winter where nothing much is growing. You want your mulch to look beautiful and and having people there working on a space, that's all. The whole conversation is changing quite quickly.
Thanks, Sarah.
So how much engagement or interest the university would have in projects like this, as an institution, to have those resources to maybe acquire land, to keep something, involved as part of the university system? Have you ever tried that before, or would this be a project that could be included as part of the university's system of providing these opportunities for research and civic engagement and so forth?
Yeah, civic engagement is the big thing here. So the big driver is working with local communities. We are in Newham, which has pockets of very deprived areas, people with low incomes and people struggling from food poverty. So there is a kind of context to what we're doing. The university generally
make space available on the campus for these kind of projects, so land it controls. In terms of purchasing additional land, I think that would be more complex, but we have been involved in small research projects on campus before and space has been made. So we already have there is a gardening club which involves local people, and there's certainly scope to expand that. In terms of the project we've done, what we often do with these kind of designs, we're working with professional landscape architects and also developers. So we'll be presenting these ideas to the developer of this site to see if it's something that they can actually take on in their domain. And it may not be in the location that we've selected at this point. There may be an opportunity to incorporate a food forest, for example, in an allotment site that's fenced, because again, as was brought up before, this idea of, control and fencing and securing the food forest kind of comes into that. All new developments generally have allotments on them because it's such a key driver for biodiversity, sustainability, but also for community action and mental well-being. So it may become part of that.
This is a very ambitious project. I can tell from just all of the great designs. And so I would love to see it actually become manifested in some real way in the future.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So I'm curious to know what from the students, what did you learn that you didn't know before, any of the students?
I visited a very interesting site on a site tour we did once in the Netherlands, where there was a site which was kind of there because they were trying to clean up the land, and it was safe for people to go onto it. And they had created a lot of kind of structures. They had it for 10 years, and they very much used it. They had aquaponics. They were mediating the soil. And they had it for 10 years, and then it was going to be handed back and it was going to become something else. And they were actually looking at how they could best remediate the soil by also making use of it. And it was just such an interesting project to see. It kind of, I can't really remember the details of the funding, but it comes sort of from community, and it attracted people who even had officers there who were very much looking at all of the chemicals, how they could remediate that space. They were looking at planting. They were, and it also was just really providing a space for the community. We were there on a Friday, and people came and had drinks, and they used the produce and socialized there. And I guess that sort of had given me an initial idea about this. I actually have to hold my hands up. I wasn't aware of food forests before this. I very much was aware of kind of more community food spaces, but the idea that you can create something which is almost going back to a kind of a medieval, sort of in the UK, we would have before sort of had mass agriculture, the forest would have controlled sort of, would have been storing the carbon. There would have been fruits and vegetables growing in this way naturally. So I was kind of looking around where I live thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could somehow return something like that when I was initially looking at this project, and how could you make it work economically? So I guess it's really taught me a lot about what you can do with a small space, how you can try to create something which is more self-sustainable. We've tried to think about it as also sort of thinking about our community, that we want to come there and use it and get a kind of a well-being use from it within our site. I kind of hope that, much like Claire says, this kind of ground roots, which works a lot in this country, would kind of take this kind of thing on. I mean, certainly you get food cooperatives who are looking to buy food from very local sources. You get restaurateurs who want to get local native plants and then put them into their restaurants. So hopefully there is a future for this sort of thing. So I've really enjoyed working on it as well, and working with our bigger team on it as well. So thanks, Natalie.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have a question for Claire.
Okay.
I'm sure London's pretty well established regulatory wise, but have you run into problems with any zoning restrictions and things like that? I know here in Florida, we have a lot of population movements coming in. So a lot of areas that were considered very rural now are becoming more urban, and, you know, the zoning restrictions have changed, and that's caused some kind of impetus to, I guess, some conflicts in certain areas. Have you experienced any of that?
Yeah, so the way that it kind of works in the UK, we don't have zoning restrictions, we have a planning process. So whereas in the States, certain areas are kind of designated for certain types of use, and you can kind of then proceed with that use kind of as long as you're within a parameter, I guess. In the UK, everything is more on an individual basis. So some things require planning permission from the local government, some things don't. Generally, things like planting trees, creating this kind of food forest wouldn't require planning permission, but there are some aspects that would. So if you have any kind of building, a structure, so things like a toilet or a large composting building, rather than simply a compost pile, would require planning permission. But generally, my experience of that is that they wouldn't be unduly withheld. So there's a presumption in favor of sustainable development, which this kind of scheme would be. The only considerations would be around things that were mentioned before, like rodents, like will providing something like this, you know, create a problem for the local community, and that would have to be considered. The main thing that triggers needing to get planning permission from the local authority is earth moving. So if you were going to be doing a certain amount of earth movement, you then require planning permission. So as another example, in an existing public park, you could add a food forest without planning permission, but you wouldn't be able to add any buildings, so facilities, without getting that permission first. Things like play areas. So if you want to put in a new play area, you can do that without any kind of restriction. But if you're going to move a lot of earth to create that play area, it triggers the need for permission. So it's just being smart about how you implement these things. But I think in terms of a food forest, we're not too restricted in terms of that because we don't have zoning in the same way. But it also is an opportunity. So one thing with planning is that there are planning policies written which encourage certain types of development as well. So when a big new residential development is built, and in London those can be 12,000 new homes, as opposed to in a more rural area where it may be 500 to 2,000 new homes, there are requirements that you have to meet. And one of those requirements is allotments, as I mentioned, so places to grow. You have to provide green spaces, public parks, water management, so sustainable water management. And these are requirements of any new development. So even in London, where there's very limited ground to build on and things tend to go up, all of these buildings tend to have podium landscapes because they are required to provide green space, to provide biodiversity. So we now have a government net gain policy. So every new site has to provide at least 10% net gain of biodiversity from its baseline. And its baseline is wherever it was determined you were at base when you began. So you can't, as a developer, go in, bulldoze everything, then do your baseline. You will have that taken back. So it will be considered based on evidence of what existed on the site when you took it over. So these kind of things do help drive these types of projects. You know, it really does help. You can't kind of just go and build a building and give no kind of benefit to the local community or to the environment. So we're quite lucky in that respect.
You sound like you're a lot further along than we are in that category. Thank you.
We may be, but we are further behind Europe. So it sounds great, but maybe do this conference with Germany one day and you'll see what real progression is in terms of the environment.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind. So my question is to the students: how do they feel about this process of virtual exchange as an education tool between different universities and so forth? Because I know, to me, I've never done this before, but I think this is a great opportunity that we should continue. But I'd like to hear from the students, what did they get out of this, and what do they think about this type of teaching tool?
Well, for me, it's really interesting to be able to understand how those processes work on other continents as well. It's already, as an international student in the United States, it's already a new lesson learning how the process works here, and being able to understand how it works on the UK. It actually opens my mind into another possibilities on how we can work within sustainability on coming from different perspectives.
Different
Yeah, I think
locations too. Yeah.
I think it's particularly interesting because you said you're an international student studying in Florida, and in the room here we have international students who are studying in the UK, and so everybody brings a different perspective and different ideas, and even those who are what we call home students from the UK also are bringing different perspectives depending upon their background and so on. Anyone, Tisha, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so to add with Bruna that coming from different backgrounds, we do understand different cultures, how different mechanism and how different climate works. They help us to, be aware that how you should move forward with the design. You have to consider all the aspects. Now, if you understand designing in here, designing in, I'm from India, so I know a few sustainable techniques from India. Learning with you guys, we might be able to understand how sustainable techniques you guys use in Florida to cope with environmental issues would really help and expand our ideas to another level. It would be a great exposure, I feel.
Yeah, this is really great because, I've always thought about our college, of global sustainability. And, it started off as a relatively small college years ago. I think our inaugural class was about 15 students, and they were mostly American students. And the idea was that they would take their classes, on campus and then do an internship abroad, and like a mini Peace Corps and so forth. But over time, we had to expand to include more international students to come into our program. And but a lot of the students wanted to get local students wanted to get jobs, in the area. Like this local area didn't necessarily want to travel. And I got a little bummed out because at one point it seemed like we were no longer sending students abroad. But because of the influx of international students, I started to become aware of the fact that we were now starting to educate the world, that we were becoming global because we were having international students come, and we would give them sustainability education, and then they would go back to their respective countries and so forth. And so I think I see this global exchange that we're doing here, this virtual exchange, as a continuation of that, because we have the international students in other places in the world, and we're now communicating, across oceans and across continents. So the globalization part is really expanding in a way that I just didn't expect. I'm just really happy to see that taking place in real time. Okay, it looks like Richard has a question.
Thank you, Dr. Dorsey. Very good to see you again. I've got my USF alumni hat on, so tell where I am. I'm familiar with hundreds of online courses that the United Nations system offers on, I call it resilient development, because that was the term in the 1920s, développement durable, resilient, not sustainable. So I'm wondering if, as a do tank, USF and the University in London might consider contacting the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. They have approximately 200 online courses, and I think a course on food forests would really elevate not only your programs and your work, but be a motivator for more students everywhere to learn about food forests, food systems, and nutrition, just as a thought for consideration. Thanks again for your leadership, Dr. Dorsey. Always you're a pace setter. Thank you.
It's good to see you again. It's been a while. Thank you. Well, one of the courses I'm planning on developing would be a course called Global Food Security and Resilience. That's something I'm working on as an undergraduate course currently. And so hopefully this would be one of the techniques or themes that we could add to a course like that, because I'm beginning to feel, this course on nutrition, the course is on, sustainability, but we don't talk about resilience as much as we should, because how do we respond to these disasters? For example, here in Florida, we just experienced 2 major hurricanes, and there's a lot of disruption that's taken place. I mean, unfortunately, those pictures of Rosebud are not the same now. There was some devastation to Rosebud, and so we want to be resilient. We want to come back from those things, and so hopefully we can start to look at resiliency as another layer of sustainability in the face of these unforeseen but also predictable disasters and disruptions in our our ecosystems and our food chains and our social structures.
Yeah, I mean, we do talk about resilience. The camera has moved. We do talk about resilience in our programs. We did a project last year called the Resilient City, and it was very much thinking about a new community on the Thames and what that looks like, but also how resilient communities along the Thames have been for hundreds of years. And how have they dealt with challenges? But obviously there are these new challenges. And one of the project students worked on last year was a flood storage area, which is part of a wider strategy by government to let the water in along the Thames. So the thing is, we've been keeping water out for so long that we're reaching a tipping point, literally, where water can no longer be held back. So thinking about resilience in that, and we are here on the Thames, and in the local context for us, that means flooding, river fluvial flooding. For you guys, it relates more to natural disasters like hurricanes and large storms. But yeah, I mean, resilience and sustainability really do go hand in hand. So we talk about sustainable communities a lot as well. And a resilient community is a sustainable community, a community that can continue to build and continue to grow. And trying to a particular thing is about reducing social isolation. And all of these projects do that. So they improve mental well-being, they reduce social isolation, they bring people together. And it's all about those multifunctional benefits that we get from, there's biodiversity benefits, there's flood management benefits. But it's, as you said at the beginning, Joseph, it's about people. And, people are what keep these kind of spaces going.
Okay, thank you, Claire. So I think it's time to shift gears. We've talked, in this part of the morning here and afternoon over there about the food systems, specifically focused on food forests and edible landscapes. But we also have the next theme, which will be looking at material ecology and the circular economy. So at this point, I want to, thank you, the students on both sides, for your contributions. This was really great stuff. I want to give you a round of applause. Let's give them a round of applause, everybody. Let's see those hands, hear those hands clapping for the students. Great job. You're our future. You're the ones that are going to help us solve these issues. So what I want to do is take a 5-minute break, and we will shift gears to go into the material ecology. Dr. Colhane will kick it off by talking about the research and work, the do tank work that he's doing on Trashcrete, followed by Oluchukwu, who will be talking about the Sugarcrete aspect of what you're doing over in East London, which is also expanded towards other parts of the world. And then one of our alums, Erica Lee Mathenia, will be talking about the research he's doing with the composting of clothing and textiles. And so all of this is about material ecology and how we can continue to be more sustainable and more resilient. So we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll convene at basically, I guess you could say 11:30 for us, and was it 3:30 for you guys? Whatever. 3:45, sorry. Anyway, see you in 5 minutes. Okay, well, welcome back. We can shift gears and move towards the material ecology component of the symposium. Kicking off will be my colleague, Dr. T.H. Colhane. I'm going to quickly read his background. Dr. Colhane is an associate professor of instruction and director of climate mitigation and adaptation concentration at the Patel College of Global Sustainability here at University of South Florida. He teaches several important graduate level courses in our Masters of Arts program, including navigating sustainable food, energy, and water, the FEW Nexus, climate change adaptation and mitigation, waste not, want not, considering waste and repurposing wasted resources, envisioning sustainability, tools for 21st century communicators of sustainability, and research methods for sustainability. Dr. Culhane has built functional biodigesters around the world and was recently awarded as Biogas Innovator of the Year by the international organization that advocates for safe and plentiful production of biogases. His community engagement teaching experiences include working with the favelas of Brazil, the urban slums of Cairo, the rural communities of Palestine, and on indigenous American reservations in the USA. Throughout his planned workshops and site demonstrations, Dr. Culhane has introduced new and innovative technologies such as Trashcrete to local audiences and worked with collaboration with numerous local partners in the US and abroad. So without further ado, I will introduce my dear friend and colleague, Dr. T.H. Culhane.
Thank you so very much, Joseph. It's great to be with you, and thank you for inviting me to this international conference of ideas. You know, the Nobel Prize winning economist Kenneth Boulding famously wrote about the difference between the cowboy economy, which many colonial settler states had adopted, the extractive cowboy economy, and the spaceman economy. And notwithstanding the fact that here in Florida we have NASA and we are part of the space economy and have been since its inception, much of Florida's politics revolve around, unfortunately, that cowboy economy, extractive mentality, and this has stymied us in many ways. So you have to adopt a certain cultural attitude of bridge building if you want to make that transition that the great economists and deep ecologists have suggested. And it's sometimes tough. So Rosebud is trying to serve that function of being that bridge in a state that is increasingly divided by political perceptions that climate change is an anathema that can't be talked about. We're not allowed in public institutions here, as you probably know, to use the word climate change. So the program I direct is called Climate Mitigation and Adaptation. Doesn't bother me. The other perception is that any Green New Deal or any environmental sustainability and social justice initiatives are considered suspect because we have in Florida the Anti-Woke Act passed by our governor. So waking people up to their responsibility for some of the damage that has been done to both society and ecology is a tricky task. But every year we go up to Tallahassee with our students, with the Gen Cleo women-led climate organization, and we lobby and we talk to our House and representatives and our senators. And we're finding a language that works, but the language that works best is demonstration, of course. As Malcolm X famously said, don't criticize somebody for drinking from a dirty glass of water, simply offer them a clean glass and let them make their own decision. And because Florida is always about rhetorically being the freedom state and about certain choices, not all choices are honored by our state, we have to offer these alternatives. And so what we've done at Rosebud is we have created this environment that has indigenous education, student projects, ecotours, regenerative agriculture, recycling and repurposing. And my wife and I made a pact about 7 years ago up in National Geographic in Washington on stage when they said, are you going to choose planet or plastic as part of their big initiative? And we said we'd choose planet. And then we came back to Rosebud and we decided we would never take out the garbage again. And by not taking out the garbage, we were acting as extremely radical, responsible adults saying, we brought this stuff home. And now imagine that you could go up in the Floridian way to the garbage truck when it comes to your property and hold up an air shotgun, you know, and go, get off my land. You don't get my SHI and you know what. That's my SHI, you know what. I went to Walmart. I bought the banana. The banana that I ate became literally my SHI, you know what, and that goes in my composting toilets and my biodigesters, so you ain't getting that. Not giving that to the municipality, not giving it to wastewater treatment. That nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium staying here on this property. And the banana peel, which has more appeal because it's got more of that, that nutrient value than the starch and sugar that I ate, that's staying on this property, so you ain't getting that. So no food residuals, organic residuals. There's no such thing as food waste. You ain't getting my organic residuals because I want all that. And then the plastic bag that I stupidly took home, I wasn't thinking, and I didn't bring my canvas bag, and I brought home single-use plastic. Well, you ain't getting that either because that's a hydrocarbon, and that has value. So what we did is we said we're going to just own up to this and be very aggressive about owning, because America seems to be a lot about ownership and private property. We said, this is our private property, this so-called garbage, which we know is part of a material ecology. So for the first many years, we were keeping it in these big totes until we'd accumulated so many big totes that we didn't know what to do with. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I think Oluchukwu just came on. Yeah.
Okay.
She moved.
Okay. So we were keeping this stuff and thinking, what will we do with it? But then finally, the bishops bought a granulator crusher, this blue machine that you see here. So all those toothbrushes and dental floss and water filters and lighters, you name it, all that could be crushed up and not go into our beautiful oceans here on our coast. And then the Elizabeth Moore Foundation came over for a visit. Elizabeth Moore herself from Sarasota, very concerned about environment. And she gave a donation to the Patel College. And we got a small precious plastic shredder. Patel College, our dean, and Shirley Boyd, who's on this call, our human resources and finance officer, found some funds to get one of those food grinding machines that's up here. And little by little, we started experimenting. And here's what you can see the result is. I hope you can hear. Can you hear the music? Yes. Are you hearing it? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So you can see our precious plastic shredder and what we did with it. And our students come here and they shred and grind plastic and food and glass and make all of the stuff recyclable.
If you want to make the world a better place, you shred, you grind, and you granulate. If you want to help us sidestep a frightful fate, you shred, you grind, and you granulate. It's such a simple concept. We're all stupid when we don't. You don't have to be a Superman to save the world at home.
And then we go around the world and we export
shred and grind and granulate. Just shred and grind, don't wait.
This is the favelas of Brazil. We've taken these technologies and ideas to, and of course at home, our children participate in that, even their diaper waste. So this idea that there are concepts in machinery that can help has then forced us to think, well, then what do we do? Now we have the stuff ground up and shredded, but what do you do with it if you made this thing where you're not going to give it away, where you're going to keep it all at home? And what we eventually did, the bishops purchased a glass crusher, and we started making glass cullet. And once we had sand made from glass without removing the labels, we found it was very easy, just ridiculously easy to put 1 part cement, 2 parts plastic shred, and 3 parts glass cullet, or the reverse, depending on what you want, and make these really dense, durable structures and paving stones like this gopher tortoise to celebrate. And you can see here.
I'm Dr. T.H. Culhane from the Patel College of Global Sustainability at the University of South Florida, Tampa, and I'm the director of the Climate Mitigation and Adaptation Program. And this is a glass crusher. The glass crusher produces a really high-quality cullet, or crushed glass sand, that takes on the color of whatever kind of glass we put in, whether it's clear or colored. Hydroponic growth medium and for construction. Look at how pretty that is. We're using it to create beautiful ornamental reflective paving stones. From this recycled glass cullet, we're able to make paving stones, and wildlife sculptures like this over tortoise, and the sculpture of a Florida black bear that our student Marilyn is currently working on. Hey, Marilyn. Hi. We also have these reflective paving stones whose surface albedo reflects heat and light away, and think that this is a great solution for all paved surfaces.
So we have, it's called the Crushing It, Cooling It movement, and we are now exploring many other, many other ways to do this. I brought my kids from Germany, and they came, because I have a child here and I have two in Germany, they came and spent a week building sculptures and building paving stones so that we don't get the flooding that we have. The molds are available, and all this is just, as I said, 1 part cement, 2 or 3 parts plastic shred, and then glass crushed sand without removing any labels at all. And then it provides a wonderful way for children to engage and say, well, there's the Florida wildlife that we're trying to preserve here. And then you build a sculpture. And then you invite people who are artistic to come and do research and then paint it. And then you do workshops. And it literally took 6 years to get enough garbage for my wife and I and our son to produce these sculptures. Now we have to bring in garbage because we don't make enough. And that's the irony, is we're mostly exporting to landfill packaged air. And when you actually shred it and grind it, you find that the surface area to volume ratio is biased towards surface area, not volume. And you don't have to have big garbage trucks coming around. So that's our basic message to the world. But through lived experience, we're life testing this idea. We're working on an alligator now, and then when we get more trash, we'll build other iconic features, and we'll do more paving so that we can avoid flooding. And then we found that if you don't have a biodigester, we of course do have biodigesters to take care of all of our organic residuals, but if you simply grind up your food waste and toss it into the garden, or in this case, we have plastic treatment bins to do the science of it, if you add 1 handful of soil in there, it will turn into soil into 3 to 6 days rather than 3 to 6 weeks or months with traditional composting. And if you don't add soil to it, then it will sit there for the 3 to 6 months until it turns to soil. But in either way, there'll be no flies, no roaches, no rats, no cats, no dogs, no chickens, no raccoons, no smells, nothing. And that's just from grinding up your food instead of composting it and then tossing it into the garden. And my wife and I finally, I'll say that my wife and I did an experiment where we went away to New York for a month. We ground up a bucket of food waste mixed. We're talking, we're omnivores, and left it in the kitchen on the sink and just added 1 handful of soil. And when we came back, there was no smell at all. And then we build these biodigesters, whether they're made out of IBC tanks locally for a family's food waste or these big dragons. We build biodigesters. They're simple tanks of water with 3 pipes, 1 pipe for the food residuals to go in, or the toilet. Well, so we take our cloth diapers and scrape the baby's diaper contents in there. Gas comes out, another pipe, and then liquid comes out another. So it's just 1 pipe in, 1 pipe out, 1 pipe out. It's easy, and then you get this wonderful.
Okay, so now what we're trying to do is test the Dragon with the Pusheen without using a gas bag, and then let it store gas up to 1 cubic meter, and then flare it off at night for the kids. A lot less CO2 than the other test. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so
but we don't flare it off. We use it for cooking and for heating water. And now, as part of our student movement, we are building all over the world. We have these GIS coded maps, and we've built at different colleges. And we'd love to come out and build biodigesters with you, whether they're small ones or big ones. That would be such a dream and a joy for us. It's all open source, our plans. We want to make sure that this meme gets out there as quickly as possible. And then we join us on these trips. We take student field trips like this one to Medellin, Colombia, where they're doing food forests in the city, and they allow rooftop gardening. So this local cook, we brought a food grinder and built a biodigester in the slums of Medellin right at his place, and all the students participated. And there's the experiment, grinding up the food and just dumping it on the ground. And then finally, they decided to build a biodigester so that they would have all of the gas that they needed right in the middle of the city and never throw out any food waste. So yeah, please join us in this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much to Dr. Colhane. Great stuff. I see that Andrew Hood wants to ask a question.
He's our new student. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to Patel College.
Hi. Hi, thank you so much. Nice to meet you. I just wanted to ask you about how are you going to make this more accessible to other areas around the globe, especially when you mentioned how it could help with flooding preventions when you turn it into these structures. How would you make this more accessible to those in need?
Well, the first way would be to have students like yourself who've come to Patel College to learn this, and then you become our, let us say, apostles, if you like, going and spreading the good news, the sort of the gospel of sustainability, and showing through your experiences with us hands-on that it has been life tested. It does work. This isn't theoretical. It's what we call praxis, the marriage of theory and practice. And as our dean often says, and our founder, Kiran Patel, the medical doctor who built our college, we're not just a think tank, we're a do tank. So when you come and you do with us, we know that you'll take that out into the world. I don't think you'll be able to not talk about it and demonstrate it. And by sharing with you over in East London and continuing these international visitations, both online and certainly real visits, what we've seen is that people transmit information and good practice because they know things work. And when they don't, it's because they haven't had enough visceral experience with something to feel that confidence. Like, you cannot stop me short of, and that may happen in the next few months, but short of putting me in jail or excommunicating me because I believe that climate change needs to be dealt with. I'm not going to stop. Wherever I've gone in the world, I have built biodigesters and used food grinders and now plastic shredders, and I even built a glass crusher out of an old food grinder with just a funnel, and I used to crush my glass in there till we got the real glass crusher. It becomes this thing where you won't stop, and you suppose that it's going to spread the same way that other convenient technologies like cell phones and computers spread, not because you were told to do it, not because it was a moral imperative necessarily, although it is for me, but because it's more convenient. Like, I don't like taking out the garbage. I don't like throwing away my money, throwing away my time. So I'm precious about it. And we invite students, like, you'll see me in class next week, you guys, bringing one of the food grinders in and going, please bring your food waste to me. My wife and I had people bring buckets of food to our wedding. That was on our wedding registry as gifts. So that's how we would do it. I just have confidence.
So TH, is the grinder working up there, the incinerator? Because I want some food waste to bring up. All right, I'm going to bring some up this weekend. Joseph keeps us in hot
water. Joseph is the one who supplied us with good hot water biogas for years now, bringing his wife and his food residuals to us and then standing there and grinding it for us. So bless you and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Liz Briggs, want to make a comment or question, ask a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Liz, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. I just want to say I was literally giggling listening to that presentation. That's so exciting what you're doing. And my legitimate question is, I live in Polk County, which is immediately adjacent to Hillsborough, where just this month they have ceased recycling.
Yeah.
And so I want to know, is there any reason I shouldn't run out and buy a glass grinder today?
It's only if it'll put you in financial hardship. People take vacations to Cancun. Even some politicians who should be staying home when bad weather hits their communities, they're off to Cancun with their families. Each vacation you can look at as an investment. If you forego that vacation to the beach in Cancun and protect our beaches here in Florida by investing in food grinding and glass crushing and plastic crushing technologies, then you've created value. And there is a market value. Every kilogram of sorted crushed plastic by color sells for $10 minimum. PET can often go for as much as $1,000 per ton on the spot market. We go to recycling facilities. Polk County's argument is that they have 200 years worth of landfill space left, they say, and we've argued with them on television. They probably hate me because I said that they needed to go back to school. But they are ignoring the Florida Wildlife Corridor ideas that land should not be made into landfill. It should be rewilded for wildlife. And there's a lot of arguments that are teased together. But no, if you're in Polk County, you have a mandate, I think, because of their attitude, to show them that there is a better way. Give them that clean glass of water. And I would suggest that you start with the glass crusher is $7,500. That may be a bit out of your budget, but you can do it out of a food grinder. I would start with a food grinder because you can get those for a couple. Don't get the cheapest one for $100 because they don't fully shred. Get like a $250 food grinder, and then you can modify it for crushing glass. You can use it for, can't use it for plastic. For plastic, you have a little bit more difficulty. But there's also techniques we can teach you on how to use plastic before it's shred, depending on the type of plastic, if you sort it. So we're here for you. But yes, go out and buy all the machinery you can and hang on to your garbage. Don't give it away. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Culhane.
You're welcome.
So looks like, Claire, you have a question?
Yes. The thing doesn't follow me. Sometimes it does. Yeah, I was interested in, so one of the things that struck me about your presentation was that one of the things in the UK that we unfortunately don't have that many of you do in the States is very large backyards. So we all have very tiny houses and very tiny yards. And what was interesting was that when you came to the end of the presentation, you said 6 years worth of waste was basically the 3 sculptures and the few paving slabs that you had made. So actually it's a really small amount over 6 years. But in terms of the facility to create that, do you think there is a way of kind of scaling it to a neighborhood level? So on a neighborhood level, you could go to, the street corner, you could take your waste, it could be done on a neighborhood level. And if so, have you done any economics on that? Like, could it actually be cheaper than the government showing up to take your waste effectively through taxes?
These are fantastic questions. And while I'm not the economist, although I love economics, and I haven't had time, and no student in my class has done that study. I think it'd be great for your students, perhaps, and for our students. I can say that cities like San Francisco, where my cousin lives, they already have docents in the airport who are taking the compostable plates and forks and knives and cups and all the food waste, and they stand and direct you to that dedicated green bin in the airport. And then that goes to the municipality and they give it to recycling facilities. Similarly, when you're doing garbage pickup, just like in Manila in the Philippines, when I was visiting, the garbage trucks all say, if you haven't sorted out the organic fraction, we won't take your garbage. Like if it's dirty and it's not properly placed, we're just leaving it. It's like your business. And that's inspiring because the capital costs for the machinery are dwarfed by the amount of labor, repair, maintenance of these massive trucks that are coming in burning fossil fuels. Although I know in the UK, a lot of your garbage trucks burn biogas. Same with Paris. I was there last year and they're burning biogas and proudly saying it. Germany, as you mentioned, Germany's way ahead of the pack and they have dedicated biogas facilities. In Sweden, we went on buses, rode in cars that we'd rented that drove on biogas, and you went to the filling station. It was municipal garbage. So they see the value in that, their trash. And they're like, you ain't taking our waste. This is ours. In fact, in Germany, we can't get food waste because the supermarkets have contracts with the biodigester companies. So this ecosystem hasn't developed in many parts of the world, but where it has, it's proven itself so that it doesn't any longer need subsidy. And we visited a big plant in Krems, Austria this summer, where the family churned from pig farming to energy harvesting. And then they have these clean residuals that go to the recycling. Because the reason China won't take our garbage here in the United States isn't because they don't consider our plastic or our glass valuable. It's because it's contaminated with organics. So that's why I said to Liz, start with a food grinder and put everything into your garden or your biodigester. It doesn't matter if you don't have a large plot, because we showed in Brazil in the favela, if you grind up your food waste, you can pour it into your flower pots. I mean, in the house. So the volume issue for the organic is a non-issue. And then the volume issue for shredding and crushing glass and stuff should better happen at the neighborhood level where you get these economies of scale. It really is transport and labor that is making the economies difficult, because you've got these massive trucks coming to pick up massive volume on a daily, weekly, tri-weekly level. It's just not worth their while because they have to cart it so far. So local is the answer, but I wish I had the data to support it, and that'd be a great student project.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. So we have the two additional speakers, Lu Choku and Erica Lee are both here, but I'm talking to Erica. Erica's scheduled to start speaking, like in the next 5 minutes, but has a tight schedule to leave. If is that correct, Erica? Because what I'm thinking, if I could switch it around, if it was okay, if Erica went before you, Oluchukwu, is it okay if she? Okay, so Erica.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so because I know that you're scheduled to start now, and I wanted to make sure that you get your presentation in if you have to leave. So we'll switch the order and have Erica go next, and then after that, Oluchukwu will be talking about her Trash Creek project. Let me introduce Erica Lee Mathenia. Erica is one of our alumni from the Patel College. She finished in 2015, and I have the honor of being her advisor at that time. So Ms. Lee is the founder and director of Sonapart, an environmentally and socially conscious organization leading research projects on textile recycling and circular design focused on solving a critical issue, the clothing industry's rampant pollution rate. And on December 1st, 2021, Erica's material creations were highlighted at the special holiday event called the Dali Dozen in 2021, where her original designs, bow ties, fabric, and art were on display at the Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. Since 2022, Erica has been conducting textile composting research at the Rosebud Continuum Sustainability Education Center in Land O'Lakes, Florida. And in March 2023, Erica presented her textile composting research at the Global Soil Biodiversity Conference in Dublin, Ireland. Erica plans to expand her research focus to studying circular economy and fashion industry as a PhD student in a university in Finland. And so I'm really proud to introduce my one of my proteges and good friends, Erica Lee.
Thank you. That was a very nice intro. I am trying to share my screen. So I am Erica, and I've been working as an independent researcher for the past, probably since I graduated, but certainly for the past 5 years on a textile composting project. You can go to the next slide, please, Dr. Dorsey. And when I was a student at USF, I graduated in 2015. I was focused on sustainable agriculture and learned about composting. And it feels embarrassing to admit that I learned about composting at like almost 30 years old, but this is how it happens. And it blew my mind that it was something that's so useful, and we don't use our waste in more productive ways, as Dr. Culhane was just talking about. And I thought composting was just this like amazing miracle practice because it's easily accessible to all of us. We all have food waste. And you can go to the next slide. And it just didn't make sense to me why we weren't using it more effectively instead of throwing it in the trash can. And while I was a student, I also learned, I was researching sustainable agriculture and focusing on food waste. But there was one article that I read that also talked about cotton agriculture as part of the agricultural system, which was a light bulb moment for me, because even though I know cotton is a crop, we don't often talk about it as much, maybe more so now, but not 10 years ago when I was a student. And it's incredibly takes its toll on the agricultural industry. It's a very water intensive crop. And we have a tremendous amount of clothing and textile waste in the same way that we have a tremendous amount of food waste. And so arguably the two things we do every day, eat and get dressed, come from the same system. And so I started to go down, I made my transition from sustainable agriculture into sustainable fashion. And this is where I started my bow tie business and started reusing my fabric scraps. And when you learn a little bit about how unsustainable the clothing and textile industry is, it's hard to unknow or unsee some of these statistics. And these are US statistics, but the average American throws away 82 pounds of clothing a year, and it's over 11 million pounds that's ending up in landfills because so much of our clothes are polyester and nylon and synthetic material. It's leaching a lot of toxins into the soil, air, and groundwater, and even the cotton items that are getting thrown away, or wool or silk, the natural fiber materials. Because in a landfill, like a compost, it needs air to breathe. In a landfill, it's not being aerated. So in that process, it's leaching methane into the atmosphere, even though it's an organic item. And I know, based on some of my research, that the UK also has quite a lot of clothing and textile waste, and a lot of Western Europe overall. The next slide, please, Dr. Dorsey. And some of the thing with clothing and textile waste is we don't really have a way to effectively donate our clothes, or recycle our clothes, rather. In the EU, there are some provisions with the circular economy that focus on clothing and textiles circularity, but it's a lot about mending and repair, and a few EPR policies, and extender producer responsibility. In the US, California just passed the first EPR policy of the country. So that's very exciting, because California sort of leads the way in what the rest of the country eventually adopts. So hopefully that transition happens sooner rather than later. But I think a lot of people buy clothes and say, oh, I'll just donate it, as a way to alleviate their spending habits or consumption habits. And while donating is very nice in theory, there's a dark side to it. And when we donate, it makes our problem someone else's problem. Presently, almost all over the world, and the infrastructure is just not in place for us to effectively recycle textiles. There are, especially at scale, there are some companies that will take clothing and pulp it and make it into building insulation or foam for sound rooms and recording studios, and that is great, but it's not scaled enough that it's really making a dent in the volume of clothes that are going to waste each year. And a lot of our clothes in the US are going to Africa. I think a lot of clothes in Europe are also going to Africa. In the US, we're also sending a lot of our clothes to South America. And these clothes, when I say it makes our problem someone else's problem, these photos here are from the Atacama Desert in Chile. And this is the world's largest open clothing donation landfill site that can be seen from space, which is truly mind-blowing to me. But this is what our clothing abundance crisis looks like when it is getting donated someplace else. In the next slide, Dr. Dorsey. And so I have been working on composting. I discovered my love of composting when I was a student and was focusing on sustainable agriculture solutions. And then I read this article that also talked about cotton. And I started a home studio. I have a home studio. I have a sewing machine. And I make bow ties and stuffed animals and other things and quilts. And I had more fabric scraps than I knew what to do with. And I remembered that cotton is a crop, and if it came from the earth, it can go back to the earth. So I started doing some small experiments, composting my fabric scraps in my backyard, and then at a community garden, and then at a smaller farm. And now I've been at Rosebud for the past 3 years. And I have been able to compost quite a lot of clothes in what is essentially a backyard experiment, even if it was at a community garden. Sorry, my cat was at a community garden, and at Rosebud, it's not an industrial composting facility. We don't have like 10-foot or 3-meter tall, compost windrows. To date, so anything that's natural fiber can be composted. Cotton, linen, silk, wool. This is what I have confirmed in my experiments. Polyester blends don't really break down. Polyester by itself certainly is not breaking down. Dr. Dorsey, if you go to the next slide, I think I have the, okay. We'll stay here for a moment. The polyester blends, this is something, an area worthy of more research. And so, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Want me to go to the next slide?
Yes.
This one?
Yes, I want to go to the next one, but I also want to come back to this slide. Okay.
Okay.
So the top left corner is the polycotton blend of fabric that has been cut up. The mesh sheer looking piece that's on the bottom of that top left corner is the polyester that is left over. So this is the same piece of fabric in 3 different stages. I cut it and saved it for comparison. And it was a black poly blended shirt, and it was fine. And then, or the black material, and then the little crumbled piece in the top right of that left corner is it halfway through the composting process. So some of the integrity is starting to be compromised. And then at the end of the compost process, all that's left is this mesh that's like a sort of pantyhose looking material. So even if it is a blended material, the natural fiber will degrade from it, but it leaves a remnant, and then that presents its own problem of like, what do we do with all this polyester? So this is an area worthy of more research. And then the bottom left corner of this photo, even if the tag says it's 100% cotton or linen or whatever natural fiber, oftentimes the thread or the stitching is polyester or nylon. So I will pull out perfect chain stitching from the compost pile, and I will pull out perfect chain stitching from the compost pile. And I'm not sure what to do with that yet. Some of it can be used in the trashcrete probably, but at the same token, if the overall goal is to reduce waste, I think it's a lot better to just throw away a handful of thread than, like an armful of clothes or of t-shirts. So it's a much smaller volume than what is taking up space in the landfill currently. If we were to go this way, the bottom right corner of this screen is also, of this slide, is also the spandex that's left over from a bra that I composted. So you can see some of that's dirt, but some of that is also material still on it, the black. So the natural fiber will be eaten off or decomposed into the pile, but the polyester, the spandex remains. To date, I have composted over 800 pounds or like 400 kilograms. Sorry about my conversion. And composted over 1,000 pounds of food. Clothing counts as a brown matter, so a carbon source in the compost pile, or so I am still composting food while also composting clothes. And I've created over 400 pounds of soil organic carbon. And I've been able to partner with about half a dozen students at USF on different projects, which has been very exciting for me. And then if you can go back to the last slide, previous slide, Dr. Dorsey. And one of the reasons that I've really been focusing on textile composting is because we have a tremendous waste problem. Almost 100 billion garments are created each year, and we only have 8.5 billion people on the planet. So it's probably the only industry where supply far exceeds demand, and there's no such thing as scarcity. Even with luxury brands and a $200 or 200-pound sweater, it's honestly half the time it's still made with acrylic or polyester and not 100% wool or natural fiber anyway. And the working conditions in these factories, that's the reason garment workers don't get paid a living wage, which is oftentimes why when you go to H&M or any of these fast fashion stores, that's why a shirt is $5 or $6. Being able to address this growing waste stream is, in my opinion, really the next crisis we need to tackle. The clothing and textile industry has a lot of ripples. It touches on the agricultural industry, the oil and energy industry, transportation, because our clothes are going on more international trips than we are sometimes. Cotton is being grown in China, being manufactured, sewn in Bangladesh and India, being shipped to the US or the UK, being shipped to Africa, going on another international travel. So by being able to address our waste more locally, composting facilities ideally are happening in our community in a tri-county area. We're not shipping clothes, again, someplace else to be composted. But addressing it locally and then creating soil locally that can go back into our community with the Parks and Rec department, sold to the forestry department in used and land amendment applications. These are the opportunities for textile composting and to expand composting operations in general. I think at this point in the climate crisis, it's not just enough to limit virgin resource extraction, but we also have to participate in resource regeneration. And the act of creating compost restores our soil and one of our natural resources. And soil is also one of our biggest carbon sinks. So it's a way to address something that really affects us all. There is no life without soil, healthy soil. This is a young research field, and there are lots of opportunities to learn and grow and dive more into this. I think pulping the fabric and making it into building insulation is a really innovative and super use of textile waste, as well as mending and repairing the clothes that we have in our closet to extend the life of them. I think compost is another tool in that toolbox that we're not utilizing that just has so much opportunity to grow and expand in this field. These are some of the projects that I've been working on with students. These are some of the areas to grow in textile composting with waste management and food systems and security. There have been projects in the UK actually where a farmer shredded or sheared the sheep and used some of the wool on farms, and it preserved soil. It preserved moisture in the soil. So this is adding clothing in those applications presents opportunities like that. There's just so much. These are all areas that I don't know all the answers to, but this is where I think it can go. And this is the last slide. The next one is just questions. Thank you everyone for your time. I don't know if there are any questions, but I'll be happy to take a few.
Richard seems to have a question. Richard.
Thanks, Dr. Dorsey. Thanks, Erica. I can assure you that senior citizens and people of low income do not throw their clothes out. We rely on thrift stores. So what are the demographics of your study? Have you studied who is throwing their clothes out? Thank you.
That is a great question. I have not fully studied who is throwing their clothes out. No one I know personally. Well, that's not true. I do know some people who throw their clothes out. I have people tell me they throw their clothes out all the time. I did hang out with a bunch of ladies in their 80s and 90s yesterday, and they told me that they love to go thrifting. But these are statistics from the EPA that the average American throws away 82 pounds of clothing a year. And who these people are, I don't know. I know I certainly don't throw out 82 pounds of clothes. Some people, I'm sure, I assume no one on this call probably is throwing out that much, but then there are people who are throwing out double, triple that amount. So that's the average. I don't know. And some clothes can't be donated or upcycled, right? Like they have a stain, they have a rip, they have reached a true end of life. So then what do you do with those clothes? And not even just clothes, but textiles, bed sheets, pillowcases, curtains.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dorsey. Thank you, Erica. I wanted just to share, I live here also at Rosebud, and I met Erica here, and I was very inspired. I learned a lot from Erica's experience, and I started a little like mini composting, textile composting, because I have a child and we change clothes all the time. I always, also not all older people use thrift shops. I always use thrift shops, consignment shops. And I became more aware when I go even to the thrift shop to choose more organic based clothing for me, my family. Even my dress now, I got it from Goodwill. It's like 100% organic. So I'm more attentive to that issue. And I'm also, the mission is to be sustainable for the environment, for our own health too. And that could be also another way to encourage people to go for more organic or more sustainable choices, because it's really like we talked, Erica, here at Rosebud, how your body, how your skin can absorb part of these toxins. So if you want to elaborate on that, or that's for me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have read some studies about how different materials affect our skin. Polyester is oil. It's plastic based for anyone who is unaware. And so wearing a polyester shirt or pants is essentially wearing a plastic bag. And here in Florida, it is very humid. You can sweat more. It can create irritation if you have sensitive skin. And then it's holding moisture in, so your body temperature is rising, maybe not that much, but it's very uncomfortable to be in Florida or anywhere that's very humid in a plastic garment. And it doesn't breathe as much. Polyester, the plastic component of it doesn't allow a lot of breathability. So if you have sensitive skin, that is one way that it really affects you, as well as pants. And I think wool, sometimes I don't even feel that much warmer or cooler, depending on the climate, wearing polyester, but that's just me personally. It's like living in a house with thin windows, and it's sometimes colder inside than it is outside. I don't know if that's a good analogy or if anyone can relate to that. But if there's poor insulation, then it doesn't really regulate your body temperature. And wearing polyester is like a poor insulation for the body.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think it's now time to go to our final presenter who's over in East London. This is Oluchukwu Okonkwo. And Ms. Okonkwo, there she is. She is a PhD student and researcher working on Sugar Creek projects. Okay, she's working on Sugar Creek project since its creation in 2021. She has a bachelor's and master's degree in architecture and incorporated Sugar Creek in her final thesis, which won her a nomination for a RIBA Skin Thinking Award, one of the most prestigious awards in academia, and Architects Journal Sustainability Award. Sugar Creek is an award-winning biomaterial product made from sugar cane waste transformed into construction blocks. And in September 24, the Sugar Creek team completed their first proof of concept built Sugar Creek with a school extension in India. And on October 4th, she was awarded the prestigious Double Gold Responsible Innovation Award by Global Win, a community recognizing global women investors and innovators for their great achievements. So without further ado, I will introduce Oluchukwu.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you can hear me very well.
Yes.
I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Yes, so I'm here to talk about sugarcrete. It's like concrete, but it's made out of sugar. So I hope the name helps. Sugarcrete is a bio-waste material that's made from sugarcane waste, and it's being developed by the University of East London, precisely by the Sustainability Research Institute, in collaboration with the School of Architecture, Computing and Engineering. And every year, the university does something called Construction Week, where they, focus on something in particular. And in 2021, they were looking at sugarcane waste. And yes, so during those 2 weeks, the students look at this and try to develop it as much as they can, with the hope of developing it even further during the academic years. So in 2021, this is exactly what I did. It wasn't even called Sugar Creek then, but I knew that the material had potential, and I incorporated it in my thesis project. So why Sugar Creek? So the reason why we started is because we identified a problem with the wood industry. I know many of you have heard things like, oh, don't use concrete, use timber because it's more sustainable. But the truth is that the wood industry comes with lots of limitations, and one of them being that we just don't have enough timber. And it takes ages to grow a tree, So that's a big problem. And so the next best thing to do would be to use agricultural waste to create construction materials, particularly, precisely, sugarcane. Why sugarcane? Because sugarcane is the most grown crop in the world, with about 2 billion tons being produced every year. And about that, from that 1/3 is waste, which is around 600 million tons of waste every year. If we are to use this waste to make construction material, we can partially replace the construction, the brick industry. If we look at alternatives such as sugar alternatives, such as hemp, for instance, you can't even compare the quantity. For you to match the same amount of quantity of sugar cane when it comes to hemp, you would have to grow hemp 16,000 times more. That means you would have to grow only hemp in the entire UK, and it doesn't make sense and it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. And on top of that, sugarcane absorbs 50 times more CO2 compared to traditional forestry because it grows really fast, and 20 times more compared to hemp. Also, the way the fibers of bagasse are allows us to create a building material that has structural application that can be viable alternative to CLT while using 10 to 20 times less land. So we have three main goals. The first one is, of course, to store carbon as much as we can for as many years as we can. The second one is to use our open source strategy to create employment and export opportunity in the global south. And then thirdly, obviously, is to create low cost, high performance construction materials that can replace, high carbon intensive ones. So if we observe the sugar industry at the moment, it looks like a line. It's more like a linear diagram. So how it works is that you harvest your sugar cane, you transport it to the mill, the factory, then you obtain your sugar and your other products. And at the end of the day, you literally have these mountains of waste, literally. So what currently happens is that in most mills, 50 to 70% of this waste is being burned to generate fuel for the mills. And then you have this 30% of that is left over. So what they do is some of it is sold to paper making industry to make packaging. And the rest is simply just burned to get rid of it, right? In countries like India, for instance, India is the world most growing, the world that grows the most sugarcane. There are periods of the year where literally they just burn the waste. And you can imagine the amount of pollution and health issues that those that live around those communities are experiencing. So what we are suggesting is more of a circular economy where this surplus of sugarcane, and mind you, a lot of mills and factories are moving towards a cleaner energy. So some of them will be burning less, which means you will have more bagasse left, okay? So what we are proposing is that all these bagasse that's left can be used to make sugarcane blocks, which then can be used to build affordable houses, right? Because there's a huge housing crisis, okay, especially in those countries. And then at the end of life, these bricks can be recycled to build more houses or crushed to make new bricks or become soil replacement. So this is our proposal. Now, what we do is we help our various partners set up a factory. And we also help them to set up, to do several testing on the bricks. These are some of the values of a prototype that we've tested so far. Sugarcane has great thermal conductivity. When it comes to fire, it's classed A1, and it can bear even up to 5 megapascal. But this is just one prototype. See, the thing with sugarcane is, I like to tell people this, is that it's not just about a brick prototype. Sugarcane is more of a concept. What we're trying to do with this project is to encourage people to view construction material as something that is dynamic and not static. And what do I mean by that? I mean that by changing the formulation of sugarcane, you can obtain products that range from an insulation board to load-bearing brick. So the performance can vary completely based on the ratio that you're using and the pressure that you use in making the brick itself. Sugarcane, again, has 6 times less carbon footprint than the average clay brick and 3 times less than concrete. This map represents all the partners that we're currently working on. In fact, this map is actually outdated because we have added more. And the reason why we get so much attention is because we have this open source strategy where some of the information and the data that we have accumulated are sort of free and available for everyone to use and start their factory. So we did, and we just completed our first ever proof of concept building made from sugarcane bricks, and it's located in India with our partners, Indian partners. So again, last year during this construction week, which the university does, our students designed this school extension near Delhi. And we also designed these 2 types of bricks. These bricks are designed so the building can withstand things like earthquake, but it's also designed so we can be economical when it comes to bricks. As you can see, we have a standard one and a corner one, and these are how they are assembled together. And we had to change the formulation when it comes to lintel. So for the lintel, we used sodium silicate and obviously the waste, while for the bricks, we used lime and water, and of course, the bagasse waste. This is a picture of Armour, my colleague in India, with our partners, Indian partners. Our Indian partners, they're a very big, renowned sugar company. So they own plantation, sugarcane plantation, and also a sugar making company. This is the first machine, sugarcane making machine that they made in India. So it's all very exciting. This can actually produce about 1,600 bricks a day. So it's very efficient. These are the workers in India at work building the school with our bricks. These are the final pictures. Okay, as you can see, this is the inside. It's a small school. It's about 4 meters by 6. And as you can see, half of the building, the part below, is being rendered. And we rendered it in collaboration with an Indian architect who's an expert using natural materials to render buildings. So she rendered it with lime plaster. She mixed lime with sand, and at the end she finished it with marble dust, and also she used brick dust. So these are all the materials that she used. And then we wanted to leave, half of the building exposed so people can see, the testament, how wonderful that this building was actually built with sugarcrete. This is outside. As you can see, the outside, we have to render the entire thing. We rendered it because of fire and also weathering. As you can see, if you notice, the roof was overhanging and it's being supported by this column. These particular bricks, we did not make them for them to be load bearing, as in for them to be carrying the weight of the roof, because we wanted to monitor a few things at the time. We just didn't want something to go wrong and then we just can't figure out what went wrong, So we decided to, just have the roof be supporting itself with these columns and then have the bricks enclose the space so we can properly monitor how the inside, how the building performs. This is the building outside. So I think we started this project with our partners around this time last year, and by May the next year, it was already finished. And that's to tell you how eager our partners were, to just see this come to life. And that's also to tell you how much of a big problem this sugarcane waste is for them. It's a massive problem. And like I said, sugarcrete, I like to call sugarcrete modern vernacular because you have the material there and it's modern. We are solving a very modern problem with modern solution and equipment and technologies. And there are more partners that we are working with. There are new projects that we are working with. The one at the bottom, on the bottom right, is a small model that we made. Next year, we will build that at a 1-to-1 scale for the Burning Man Festival in the United States. So that's another very exciting project that's about to come along. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at the UK Construction Week, which is the biggest construction week festival exhibition in the country, to present sugarcane. And it's just seeing people warm up to the idea of using waste material, biomaterials to build their homes. It's already a big achievement to us. And it just shows that people are ready to welcome sugarcane in their homes. And I really can't wait. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Really great work. I'm going to give you a thumbs up and a clap.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, so let's open it up for any questions and comments. As you can see, this whole seminar is soon coming to a close, but I think it's been really great to see the innovative ideas and initiatives that we are doing out there that are helping us become more sustainable and more resilient. Any questions or comments?
Now, I think this whole concept is absolutely fascinating. Have you guys looked into any scaling potential? I mean, Obviously it's in a prototype generation stage right now, but what's your future to provide this kind of into mass regions in India for sure?
Yeah. So what we do with the partner that we're working with, they are thinking of setting up a factory, a proper factory to manufacture it and use it within India, but also potentially export it. So they are in a conversation with the government, because at the moment, I think in India, you can't really get a mortgage if your house isn't built with concrete. So that's the thing about warming people up, particularly the government, so they can make the right rules and regulations. So, but we're confident because this partner, it's huge, okay, and they have the resources to speak to the government and make them change their mind. So the idea is that they get the investment that they need to get, and then they open up factories all over the country, and then they just start. And we do that in India, then we do that in Pakistan, and then in Brazil, and then in China, everywhere. So we're not really manufacturing anything. We are giving them the know-how. We are on a knowledge exchange type of relationship with them, where they keep giving us data, and we support them with just the know-how and continuous research. So that's the type of, but we don't really manufacture anything, but we support them.
Okay.
I think the next. Okay, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, on your last presenter, I tried to jump in and I couldn't get off of mute there. When it deals with the polyesters and the other acrylics for wearing clothing, at least in Pasco, Hillsborough, and Hernando, I don't know about the rest of the counties, it's one of the #1 sources we're finding in our reclamation water for microplastic. So that's another problem. Pass that on to the earlier presenter, if you would.
Yeah, to Erica. Yeah, she had to leave. Okay, so we got a couple of more comments and questions before we finish up. Basan, you wanted to make another comment? Basan, see your hands up. Okay. Well, let's move on to TH. I see you the second hand up.
Thanks. That, of course, is very inspiring to me, what you're doing with the sugarcrete. We do grow sugarcane here at Rosebud, obviously not in commercial quantities, but we have some in our home garden and some on the school garden area. And I would like to exchange ideas, because if I've just sent 2 pictures in the right showing we had flame tested our trashcrete, even with plastic, and showed that with a blowtorch, just like you showed in yours, you don't get flammability that is evident at those normal temperatures. But if we wanted to infuse the bagasse or just the cane into our trashcrete, do you have any advice from your experience that we might use? Because we'll never produce enough to do a true sugarcrete until we can get policymakers and agricultural companies here in Florida, which is a big sugar producing region all over the Everglades. It'd be great for you to come and get them involved. But we can start demonstrating your project here if we got an idea. I mean, can we just shred it in our shredder and put it into our already mix of trashcrete? Would you advise that we do a separate batch? What can you advise us in terms of demonstrating to the students that come from high schools and middle schools in the community to our center all the time? How can we get started immediately?
I love this. I'm sensing a potential collaboration between you and us. To be honest with you, there is no, like I said, there is no right way of doing things yet, right? And I think that we can get creative. Probably I will not give you a yes or no, or do it this way or that way answer right here, but let's talk about it a bit later. But you can, for instance, I've seen your material and it's very powdery, right? And then our bagasse is very fibrous. So instead of using lime, you could use yours. So you could replace the lime with that, with what you have, and mix it with water or mix it with something else. This is what you could do. But maybe, I think, this is what you should do. I don't know if you've tried, because I joined in a bit late, I don't know if you've tried mixing concrete or other standard materials with your stuff and replace cement, for instance, with your stuff, just to see how it performs. If you haven't, that's fine. But when it comes to us, yeah, when it comes to sugarcrete, I think you can replace the lime or the earth that we would use or the sodium silicate with your stuff.
That's interesting because we are relying on store-bought Portland cement as the binder. And one of our students from Germany, Julia Pastorak, did some research to show that if we were to grind the glass fine enough, the silica in the glass acts as a reliable binder at certain concentrations. We didn't see that when we tried it. We couldn't tell the difference. And we're not set up for that kind of analysis, but it was like, okay, we still need a reliable binder. And I guess that's what your lime is for. So we're using Portland cement as the lime source. And then we're using the aggregate is the shredded plastic and the crushed glass cullet, even with all the labels because they're crushed up. And of course, sometimes it doesn't bind all that well. So I wonder what the effect if we add an organic material like if we chopped up and shredded our sugar cane, is it likely to make it fall apart more or help bind more? And what would we do to compensate?
Do you know what's funny? Now that you talked about glass, I should have actually thought of this. We use sodium silicate, which is also silica, which is known as liquid glass.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can find sodium silicate anywhere because the sodium silicate that we use has 60% water and 40% silica. So I don't know if you can find somewhere where you can have sodium silicate, even if it's 100% sodium silicate, and mix it with your powder and some water in a ratio that you can remember and mix it with the bagasse. Now, see, it should work. It should bind it because whenever I mix it with sodium silicate, it's so strong. It's even stronger than lime sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, because soda glass, which is what most glass is, I mean, ironically, drinking soda pop, I mean, it's got nothing to do with it when we say drinking a soda, but soda glass or sodium silicate glass is I think most of the beverage glass bottles that we have. And so we're trying to do everything without using any store-bought materials, just relying on garbage, except with that binder, which is the cement, and looking for ways to reduce that. So maybe this is something where we just experiment with different granulations of it because we have powdered, very little amounts, and then we've got various sorts that we do at various sizes. So yeah, I mean, we'll try. The worst that can happen is it falls apart. How do you make the molds though?
These are some great conversations and I think we could continue.
Let's exchange emails afterwards.
Yeah, let's do some real collaboration.
Interesting.
Okay.
And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have this symposium with Claire and you over at the University of East London, is that I did want to strengthen collaboration with our university and our unit in particular, so that we can continue to do sustainability, to be a do tank rather than just a think tank, but we're going to actually do things. But as we're about to leave, I'm going to give the final word to Claire, and thank you and your students for, believing in this little project that we thought about, that we brought to fruition, that's now a seminar that will hopefully become collaborations in the future. And I'm hoping to come over there sometime and see you, maybe next summer or something. So how would you like to finish this off?
Yeah, I mean, I really just want to say thank you to the students who were here and they've stayed longer than they normally would. Congratulations on your presentations. They were excellent. And I know they were all a bit nervous, but they did really well and they got across their ideas really clearly. And also thank you to our other speakers, the researchers in the group. I've just been kind of glued to the screen and making notes. And there's absolutely opportunities for collaboration, continuing with the students, but also between researchers as well. Hopefully we can make it over there as well. I think it's an opportunity for us all to start seeing how this kind of works on a more ongoing basis rather than simply for one event. I think there's definitely opportunities. So thank you very much, Joseph and colleagues, for participating, especially given what you guys have been through over the last few weeks in Florida. We appreciate you still hosting this today. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it as well. Well, that's it, people. Thank you for attending this symposium, and I look forward to seeing and working with you all in the near future. Good day. Good evening to you guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.